It is 3 in the morning. You wake without a clear reason, no loud sound, no urgent message, just a quiet return to awareness. The room feels still, as if the world has stepped back and left you alone for a moment. The air has a coolness that daytime often hides. Shadows rest in familiar corners. A small light glows somewhere, steady and indifferent. Your mind feels clear, almost too clear. Not the sharp clarity of productivity, but the strange clarity that appears when distractions are gone. You do not feel pulled by tasks. You do not feel required to perform. You are simply awake. In that stillness, a simple question lands with unusual weight. Why is there anything at all? And why are you here to notice it? The question arrives like a quiet object placed in your hands. It is not loud, but it is heavy. You do not need to force it. It presses against you on its own. You may try to push it away, to return to sleep, to think about something easier. But the question lingers. It has a gravity that ordinary thoughts do not have. Take a slow breath. Let the inhale come gently. Let the exhale leave slowly. You do not need to solve the question. You do not need to build an answer tonight. Let it sit. Let it be present without turning it into a problem you must fix. This is what philosophers mean when they call it a foundational question. Not because it sits at the start of a textbook, but because it sits underneath every other question you ask. It is the floor beneath the room of your thinking. Most of the time, you walk across that floor without looking down. You take it for granted. But at moments like this, you notice the floor and feel how strange it is that it exists at all. If you ask, "What should I do with my life?" you already assume you have a life to live. You already assume you exist. You already assume there is time, and that you can act, and that your actions matter. If you ask, "What is real?" you already assume something exists to be real. You already assume there is a difference between illusion and truth, between appearance and what lies behind appearance. Even doubt relies on existence. Even confusion relies on existence. You cannot doubt nothingness. To doubt is already to be. So this midnight question is not one question among many. It is the question that makes all other questions possible. In daylight, existence feels normal. It feels like background noise. You wake, you move, you do what you must do. Your attention gets captured by screens, errands, expectations, and small pressures. Even rest can become another task. In that flow, the fact that anything exists becomes invisible. It is like air, essential, constant, and rarely noticed. But at 3 in the morning, the background can move forward. The mind stops rushing. The world stops asking. And the fact of existence becomes vivid. The bed you lie on, the ceiling above you, the quiet sound of your own breath, the awareness that you are aware. All of it becomes strange, not in a frightening way, but in a raw way. You see it without the usual filters. This is where existential philosophy begins. Not with definitions, but with attention. It begins when you stop treating existence as a normal backdrop and start seeing it as a mystery you inhabit. You realize that the most basic fact, that something is here, is also the most difficult to explain. Why is there something rather than nothing? People have offered many answers. Some say existence must have a cause. Some say there must be a necessary ground, something that could not fail to exist. Others say the question itself goes too far, that asking for a reason beyond existence is a misunderstanding, like asking what is beyond the edge of the universe. Some say existence is brute fact with no deeper explanation. Some say meaning comes not from explaining existence, but from living inside it with clarity. Tonight, you do not need to choose an answer. You only need to feel what the question does. It can feel unsettling because it dissolves familiar anchors. Anchors are the things you treat as solid. Your plans, your roles, your routines, your identity. The question cuts beneath them. It reveals that all of those anchors float on top of something you did not create and cannot fully explain. If nothing had to exist, then your existence looks fragile, contingent, unpromised. Contingent means it could have been otherwise. It means there was no guarantee you would be here, not as a punishment, not as a romantic idea, just as a fact. You can trace the chain backward if you want. The specific meeting of two people. The timing of events, the survival of ancestors, the accidents avoided or not avoided, the 1,000 conditions that aligned so that you are here, breathing, aware. If any link had broken, the person who is you would not be awake in this room. You would not be asking. You would not be noticing. This thought can create a kind of vertigo. It can make your life feel like it hangs on a thin thread. Not because danger is present in this moment, but because the concept of guarantee disappears. Existence stops feeling like a contract. It starts feeling like an occurrence, and yet the same thought can feel strangely gentle. If existence arrives without guarantee, then you do not need to justify your right to be here. You do not need to earn existence by being perfect. You do not need to prove your worth to the universe. You do not need to defend your presence as if you were on trial. You already are. You already exist. That is the starting point, not the reward. This can soften self-hatred in a quiet way. Many people carry an inner judge that speaks harshly. It says you are behind. You are not enough. You must do more. You must become someone else. The midnight question does not silence that voice permanently, but it can weaken its authority, because the deepest fact is not your performance. The deepest fact is your being. You are here. You are part of reality. The world contains you. Take a moment to reflect on this. You do not need a conclusion, just awareness. Notice your breath again. Notice how it moves without permission. In, out. The body continues. The mind can rest for a moment. Let the question remain open, like a window at night. You can look through it without trying to climb through it. Notice also the second half of the question. Why are you here to notice it? This is the quieter mystery. The universe is one thing. Consciousness is another. Why is there an inner point of view at all? Why is there experience? Why is there a sense of being someone located inside a body looking out? Even if you explain matter, the fact of awareness still feels strange. At 3 a.m, that strangeness becomes intimate. You are not only a thing in the world, you are a witness to the world. This witness can feel lonely. It can also feel sacred in a non-religious sense. Sacred as in undeniable, central, and precious. You are the place where reality becomes experienced. Whatever the universe is doing, you are one of the ways it becomes known. Now gently, you can feel the next question arriving. Once you feel the weight of existence, another question follows naturally. If you did not choose to arrive, what does it mean to find yourself already here? This is where the focus shifts from the mystery of existence in general to the mystery of your existence in particular. The world is here. You are here. You did not select your conditions. You woke up inside them. That leads us to the experience of being thrown into a life. You wake up into a life that is already in motion. Before you learn any rules, the rules already surround you. Before you speak, a language waits for you, shaped by centuries of voices you will never meet. Before you can understand the idea of choice, your body already has a shape. Your face already has features. Your nervous system already reacts in certain ways. You arrive in a place on Earth with a climate, a culture, a history, and a set of expectations. You arrive at a particular time, not any time you want, and then, almost immediately, you begin doing the strange work of living from inside what you did not choose. This is not meant to sound tragic. It is simply accurate. You did not choose your birthplace. You did not pick your family. You did not decide your first name. You did not select your first school or your first fears. You did not choose the economic conditions you would inherit, the political atmosphere you would breathe, or the technologies that would become normal to you. You did not pick your era, with its specific uncertainties and pressures. You did not choose the basic cards in your hand, yet you must play something with them. You must exist as the one holding them. Existential thinkers describe this situation as thrownness. The word can sound harsh, like someone tossed you into the world without care, but it does not have to be harsh. It is more like waking up in the middle of a story that started before you could read. You open your eyes and the plot is already moving. Characters already have relationships. The setting already has rules. The atmosphere already has a mood. You did not author the beginning, yet you still become responsible for how you move through the middle. Thrownness names the conditions you wake up inside. It names the givens. These are facts that do not ask your permission. Some givens are obvious. Your body has limits, even if you love your body. Your body has needs. Your body ages. Your body reacts. Your brain forms patterns. Your temperament leans towards certain emotions. Your health may include challenges you did not select. Your energy rises and falls. You do not freely choose these things the way you choose what to eat or what to watch. Other givens are quieter, but equally powerful. You inherit a family history, even if you try to reject it. You inherit unspoken rules, even if you never agree to them. You inherit patterns of love, conflict, silence, and expectation. Some families teach you that emotions should be hidden. Some teach you that emotions must be dramatic to be real. Some teach you that success is safety. Some teach you that safety is impossible. These lessons settle in your nervous system long before you can evaluate them. You also inherit your environment, your neighborhood or village, your school, your social class, your access to resources, your exposure to danger, your proximity to opportunity. These shape what feels realistic to you, not what is truly possible in the universe, but what feels possible in your bones. A person can tell you 1,000 motivational phrases and still fail to change the deep sense of what the world allows. Thrownness includes that deep sense too. Then there are losses. Some losses happen early, some happen later. Some losses never fully stop echoing. You do not choose who leaves. You do not choose who changes. You do not choose what breaks. You do not choose what cannot be repaired. Even the loss of an imagined future count. The life you thought you would have. The version of yourself you expected to become. The relationship you believed would last. Thrownness includes the fact that you must keep living after things fall apart. So thrownness is not a theory floating above life. It is the texture of life. It is the fact that you begin from somewhere specific. You begin from a body, a family, a culture, a set of wounds, a set of skills, a set of privileges, a set of obstacles. You begin from a particular history, and that history continues to influence you even when you do not consciously think about it. At first, this can feel like a reduction, like you are being told you are nothing but your circumstances. But thrownness does not mean you have no agency. It means your agency has a starting point. It means you do not choose from nowhere. You choose from within. You choose while standing in a place, not floating above the world like a pure mind. This detail matters because it makes existential philosophy more honest. It refuses fantasy, the fantasy of total control, the fantasy that you can design yourself without limits, the fantasy that you can become anyone at any time if you simply want it enough. That fantasy often turns cruel because when people cannot achieve it, they blame themselves completely. They treat their limitations as personal failure. They treat their starting point as shame. Thrownness challenges that cruelty. It can soften self-blame in a specific way, not by denying responsibility, but by clarifying what responsibility can reasonably mean. If you grew up without stability, your nervous system learned to scan for threat. If you grew up with constant judgment, your mind learned to anticipate criticism. If you grew up without support, you may have learned to survive alone. These are not moral flaws. They are adaptations. They may still cause problems in your adult life. But understanding thrownness lets you see the difference between an adaptation and a character defect. When you see this, you might breathe a little easier. Not because everything becomes simple, but because you stop treating yourself as if you chose your earliest wiring. You did not. You inherited it. You absorbed it. It was installed by experience. That does not make you helpless. It just makes you human. Thrownness can also reduce harsh judgment of others. When you look at someone and feel quick contempt, it is easy to imagine they freely chose every part of who they are. It is easy to imagine they woke up each day with a blank slate and deliberately decided to be difficult, selfish, careless, or weak. Sometimes people do choose badly, but thrownness reminds you that everyone begins inside a context. Everyone carries unseen constraints. Everyone has a history shaping their reactions. This does not excuse harm. It explains complexity. It encourages a calmer kind of realism. Yet thrownness has another side. It removes excuses. This is where existential thought becomes demanding again. It refuses the easy escape. You may not control your starting point, but you still shape your response. You did not choose your first chapter, but you still write later chapters through action. You cannot change everything quickly, but you can often change something. You can choose how honestly you face your situation. You can choose whether you keep repeating the same pattern or interrupt it. You can choose whether you turn pain into bitterness or into clarity. You can choose whether you hide behind your history or learn from it. This can feel uncomfortable because it takes away two common hiding places at once. It takes away the fantasy that you can control everything, and it takes away the excuse that you control nothing. It places you in a middle space where life is both given and chosen. That middle space is where most real growth happens. Think about it in ordinary terms. Imagine you start a game halfway through. The score is not what you want. The terrain is unfamiliar. You did not choose the obstacles already placed in your path, but you still have moves. You still make decisions. Your decisions still matter. If you pretend the earlier situation does not exist, you play badly. If you pretend the earlier situation determines everything, you stop playing. The honest approach is to see the actual board, then act within it. Thrownness asks you to see the actual board. This includes seeing your limits without humiliation. Limits do not mean you are broken. Limits mean you are finite. You cannot be everything at once. You cannot hold every identity, every career, every relationship, every dream. Your time is limited. Your energy is limited. Your attention is limited. These limits can feel painful. They can also create focus. A life without limits would have no shape. It would dissolve into endless possibility with no direction. Thrownness also includes seeing your strengths without arrogance. Maybe you inherited certain opportunities. Maybe you had support. Maybe you were taught skills early. Those are givens too. They are not purely earned. That does not mean you should feel guilty for them. It means you should recognize them accurately. Recognition can lead to gratitude. It can also lead to responsibility, the responsible use of what you were given. Now, in a calm voice, pause here. Notice one given in your life, something that simply is. It could be your personality, the way you tend to feel things deeply, or the way you stay steady when others panic. It could be your body, with its particular strengths and challenges. It could be your family situation, supportive or complicated. It could be the place you live, with its opportunities and constraints. It could be a loss you cannot undo. It could be a privilege you did not create. It could be a skill you developed early because life demanded it. Let it be seen clearly without fighting it. Notice what happens in your body when you name a given. Some givens produce tension, some produce sadness, some produce relief, some produce quiet gratitude. You do not need to force a positive feeling. You only need honesty. Honesty is already calming because it stops the inner argument with reality. Then notice the next question that honesty invites. If this is my starting point, what can I do from here? Not in a dramatic way, not as a grand reinvention in one night, just as a small, realistic movement. What can I do from here? Existential philosophy treats this question as central because it respects both truth and choice. It respects the truth of the situation you were thrown into, and it respects the fact that you are still an agent within it, even if your agency feels limited, even if your options feel narrow, even if you feel tired. This is also where dignity enters. Dignity does not require perfect conditions. It does not require a clean past. It does not require full control. Dignity can mean facing your actual life with open eyes. It can mean refusing to lie to yourself about what is possible, and refusing to collapse into despair about what is difficult. It can mean choosing the next honest step. Sometimes the next honest step is internal. It is noticing a pattern and naming it. It is admitting you are lonely. It is admitting you are afraid. It is admitting you are angry. Sometimes the next honest step is external. It is setting a boundary. It is asking for help. It is resting. It is leaving. It is beginning again. Thrownness does not tell you which step to take. It tells you to take steps from within reality, not from fantasy. There is a quiet paradox here. The more clearly you accept what you did not choose, the more room you often find for what you can choose. When you stop spending energy fighting the fact of your starting point, you free energy to act. Acceptance is not surrender. Acceptance is contact. It is placing your hands on the steering wheel and admitting where the road actually is. As you sit with this, you may notice the mood shifting. The midnight question of existence led to a kind of awe, maybe a kind of vertigo. Thrownness leads to something more grounded. It returns you to the texture of your life, your specific life, not the universe in general, but the world as you encounter it. And now, naturally, the next question appears. If you start inside unchosen conditions, what remains truly yours? What part of your life belongs to your choice, not to your inheritance? What part belongs to your freedom, not to your circumstances? Where does agency begin, and how far does it reach? This question can produce anxiety, because freedom can feel like weight, but it also produces possibility. Because freedom makes change real. So we move gently into the next segment. We move from thrownness into freedom, and into the uneasy feeling that freedom brings. Freedom often arrives wearing a pleasant mask. People talk about it as if it were pure air, like stepping into a wide field with no fences. They imagine freedom as release, as lightness, as the end of pressure. They picture it as a simple gift. More options, more space, more control, more life. But when you sit quietly with the reality of freedom, especially at night when distractions fade, the feeling changes. Freedom can feel heavy. It can feel like a weight placed gently but firmly in your hands. Not because freedom is bad, but because freedom asks something of you. It asks you to decide. It asks you to own the fact that you decide. It asks you to live with the consequences of your decisions, including the consequences you did not predict. This is why many people do not experience freedom as a celebration. They experience it as pressure, as responsibility, as the fear of choosing wrong. If you think back to moments when you had to choose, not between two easy things, but between two uncertain things, you can feel this pressure clearly. A job choice, a relationship choice, a choice to stay or leave, a choice to speak or remain silent. In those moments, freedom does not feel like open space. It feels like standing on the edge of a bridge with fog below. You can walk forward, but you cannot see the full road. You cannot guarantee the outcome. You can only choose, then step. This is why many people do not experience freedom as a celebration. They experience it as pressure, as responsibility, as the fear of choosing wrong. If you think back to moments when you had to choose, not between two easy things, but between two uncertain things, you can feel this pressure clearly. A job choice, a relationship choice, a choice to stay or leave, a choice to speak or remain silent. In those moments, freedom does not feel like open space. It feels like standing on the edge of a bridge with fog below. You can walk forward, but you cannot see the full road. You cannot guarantee the outcome. You can only choose, then take a step. Existentialism often defines freedom in a very specific way. It does not claim you can control everything. It does not claim you can design your entire life without limits. It begins with a more honest observation. You cannot always choose what happens. You often choose what you do next. This difference matters. Most suffering comes from confusing the two. You cannot choose many of the events that shape you. You do not choose illness. You do not choose accidents. You do not choose other people's behavior. You do not choose economic shifts, natural disasters, sudden losses, or the past that already happened. These are part of thrownness, the conditions you wake up inside. But within those conditions, you often still choose your response. You choose whether you will face reality or deny it. You choose whether you will seek support or isolate. You choose whether you will act or freeze. You choose what meaning you assign to what happened. Even if your choices feel small, they remain choices. This is why existential thinkers pay attention to attitude. Not attitude in the shallow sense of forced positivity, attitude in the deep sense of stance. The way you position yourself toward your life, the way you interpret your suffering, the way you frame your failures, the way you treat your own mind when it becomes harsh. Even in constrained situations, you still have a stance. Sometimes the only freedom available is the freedom to decide what kind of person you will be inside a difficult circumstance. That sounds abstract until you see it in real moments. A person facing unfair treatment can decide whether to become cruel in return. A person facing failure can decide whether to learn or collapse into self-hatred. A person facing loneliness can decide whether to close off or to keep their heart open enough to try again. Freedom also appears in small choices that seem too ordinary to matter. What you avoid, what you delay, what you tell yourself. Avoidance is a choice. It can protect you. It can also shrink you. Each time you avoid a conversation, a task, a truth, you are not merely drifting. You are shaping your life by subtraction. You are deciding what your future will not contain. Delay is a choice too. Sometimes delay is wise. Sometimes delay is fear with a polite name. The mind says, later, when it really means, I do not want to face what this will cost. You may delay starting a project because starting exposes you to the possibility of failing. You may delay ending something because ending exposes you to grief. Delay is not always wrong, but it is rarely neutral, and what you tell yourself, quietly, when nobody hears, is also a choice. You do not fully choose your first thought. Your first thought often rises from habit, from old conditioning, from your nervous system, but you often can choose whether to believe it. You can choose whether to feed it. You can choose whether to treat it as truth or as a passing weather pattern in the mind. Freedom in this sense is not loud. It is not always dramatic. It is often private. It is often a small internal shift that changes what you do next. So why does freedom feel heavy? Because freedom removes certainty. When you choose, you could have chosen otherwise. That is what makes it a choice, and the existence of alternatives creates doubt. Your mind begins to imagine parallel futures. If you take this job, you lose another life you might have lived. If you stay in this relationship, you lose the life that might have opened if you left. If you move to a new city, you lose the comfort of what you know. If you stay, you lose the unknown possibilities that might have been waiting. Sometimes the mind turns these imagined futures into a form of torture. It treats every choice as a test you might fail. It tries to guarantee the best outcome, but it cannot. It tries to predict the whole future, but it cannot. Then it panics. It wants someone else to decide. It wants a sign. It wants certainty. This is why freedom can feel like standing at a crossroads that never ends. Even when you choose one path, more crossroads appear. You do not choose once in life. You choose repeatedly. You choose daily. You choose in small ways that accumulate. The mind can feel exhausted by this, as if life is an endless exam where the questions keep changing and the grading is unclear. There is also another reason freedom feels heavy. It makes you responsible for meaning. If your life were fully automatic, it would feel like a program. Actions would occur like clockwork. You would simply execute routines. You would not feel the sharpness of regret or pride because you would not sense that you could have done otherwise. You might still feel pleasure and pain, but you would not feel the existential weight of authorship. You would not feel that your life is yours to shape, but because you are free, at least in the sense that you participate in your actions. Your life becomes a story you are inside of, not a story you fully control, but a story you help write. This is where meaning becomes possible. Meaning does not happen when nothing matters. Meaning happens when your choices matter. A small example can make this clearer. Imagine you see someone struggling with a heavy bag on the stairs. You can help or you can ignore them. Nobody will punish you either way. There is no immediate reward. In that moment, your choice becomes a statement, not a statement you announce, but a statement you enact. If you help, you express a value. If you ignore, you express a different value, or you express fatigue, or fear, or indifference. The action becomes part of who you are becoming. That is meaning. Meaning is not only found, it is performed. The same is true in quieter moments. When you choose to tell the truth in a situation where lying would be easier, when you choose to apologize, when you choose to stop hurting yourself with the same old self-talk, when you choose to rest instead of proving something. These choices do not always make headlines, but they shape your life. This is the paradox. Freedom creates anxiety because it removes certainty. Freedom also creates meaning because it allows responsibility. The same space that terrifies you is the space where you become real. If you want a calmer relationship with freedom, it helps to release a common misunderstanding. Many people believe a choice must be perfect. They believe they must find the correct path as if life were a puzzle with one solution. But human choices rarely work like that. Most major choices involve trade-offs. They involve loss as well as gain. They involve uncertainty. They involve risk. The demand for perfection turns freedom into a trap. A more realistic view is that you choose, then you commit. You take responsibility not only for the choice, but also for the work that follows it. A choice does not guarantee an outcome. It begins a process. Meaning comes from how you live that process. There is a calmer kind of courage here, the courage to choose without full certainty, and to accept that you are not omniscient, the courage to accept that some regret is unavoidable, because choosing one life always excludes another life. The courage to accept that mistakes do not cancel your dignity. They teach you something about your values, your limits, and your humanity. Take a moment to reflect on one choice you made recently, not to judge it, just to see that you did choose. Maybe it was small. Maybe it was whether to reply to a message, whether to go out or stay in, whether to eat something nourishing or something quick, whether to speak kindly to yourself or attack yourself, whether to do the task now or postpone it. Even small choices matter because they reveal the truth. You are not only carried, you also steer. Notice what you feel when you acknowledge that. Some people feel pride, some feel guilt, some feel fear, some feel relief. Let whatever arises be there without struggle in this moment. The point is not self-evaluation. The point is awareness. Awareness is the first step toward freedom that does not crush you. Because when you become aware of your choices, you become aware of your patterns. And when you become aware of your patterns, you gain the possibility of change. Not instant change, not perfect change, but real change, the kind that accumulates over time. Now notice what often happens when freedom feels heavy. Many people try to escape it, not by running away physically, but by hiding from their own responsibility. They pretend they have no choice. They dissolve into roles. They blame fate. They blame personality. They blame just how things are. Sometimes they cling to rules so tightly that they never have to decide. Sometimes they cling to rebellion so loudly that they never have to admit they are still choosing. This is where the next segment begins, when freedom becomes uncomfortable. The mind invents strategies to avoid feeling free. It creates stories that reduce anxiety by reducing responsibility. It tells you that you are trapped even when you have options. It tells you that you are powerless even when you are shaping your life in small ways every day. That brings us gently into self-deception, into the ways people hide from freedom, into the subtle, quiet performance of pretending not to choose when you are choosing all the time. Sometimes you say it without thinking. The phrase slips out like a reflex. I have no choice. It can sound practical, even mature. It can sound like acceptance of reality. It can sound like you are simply naming the facts. But if you listen closely, if you let silence surround the phrase for a moment, you may hear another voice beneath it, softer, less confident, more honest. I do not want to admit my choice. This is not always true. Sometimes you genuinely have very limited options. Sometimes forces outside you press so hard that your range of action becomes narrow. Existential philosophy does not deny that. It does not pretend you can simply think your way out of poverty, illness, oppression, or grief. It does not treat life as a motivational poster. It begins from reality, but it also notices something subtle. Even when options are limited, people often hide from the remaining freedom they still have. They hide because freedom carries weight. Freedom creates responsibility, and responsibility brings anxiety, guilt, and the possibility of regret. So the mind does something clever. It creates a story that reduces freedom to zero. It says you have no choice. It says you are trapped. It says you are just this kind of person. It says you are only a role, only a function, only a product of circumstances. Existentialists describe this pattern as bad faith. Bad faith does not mean you are a bad person. It does not mean you are lying in a simple way. It means you are participating in a kind of self-deception that feels comforting. It means you act as if you are not free when you are, or you act as if you are fully free when you are not. In both cases, you avoid the discomfort of being a finite, responsible human. The first form is easier to recognize. Pretending you are not free when you are. It appears in everyday language. I cannot change. I am just like this. It is not my fault. That is just how the world works. This is what I have to do. I do not have a choice. Sometimes these phrases describe real constraint, but often they also serve a psychological purpose. They remove the burden of ownership. If you have no choice, you do not have to wrestle with the moral weight of your action. You do not have to face the possibility that you are choosing comfort over truth, safety over growth, approval over authenticity. You can simply say the world forced you. You can shrink your agency until it disappears. The second form of bad faith is less obvious. Pretending you are fully free when you are not. This appears when people deny their limits. They act as if they can control everything if they just try hard enough. They refuse to acknowledge their dependency on others. They refuse to acknowledge the body's needs. They refuse to acknowledge time, fatigue, grief, or the slow cost of certain choices. They tell themselves they can do anything, be anything, fix everything. This can feel empowering for a while. Then reality pushes back. Reality always pushes back. And when it does, the person may break, not because they are weak, but because they were carrying a false picture of human life. Bad faith often shows up through roles. I am just a worker. I am just a parent. I am just a student. I am just the responsible one. I am just the funny one. I am just the problem child. I am just a victim. I am just a leader. I am just this personality type. Roles matter. They can give structure. They can give meaning. They can carry duties that keep life stable. But roles can also become hiding places. When you reduce yourself to a role, you turn yourself into an object, a tool, a function. You pretend you're a fixed thing rather than a living agent. You stop seeing your own participation. You stop seeing that you interpret the role, that you perform the role, that you choose how to inhabit it. Two people can have the same role and live it in completely different ways. Two parents can raise children with different emotional climates. Two workers can relate to their job with different integrity. Two students can approach learning with different honesty. The role does not fully determine you, it frames you, and within that frame, you still choose. Bad faith becomes tempting because it reduces anxiety. Freedom asks you to face uncertainty. It asks you to admit that you cannot guarantee outcomes. It asks you to admit that you might choose badly. So the mind seeks a shortcut. Bad faith offers it. It says, relax, you are not responsible. Or it says, relax, you are totally in control. Both versions remove the uneasy middle space where human life actually happens. This is why bad faith can protect you in the short term. It can be a form of psychological anesthesia. It dulls the pain of complexity. It creates a simple narrative that lets you keep moving. But over time, bad faith shrinks your life. If you deny your freedom, you may feel less guilt, but you also lose the power to change. You begin to live as if your choices do not matter. You stop experimenting. You stop apologizing. You stop trying again. You stop seeing yourself as a source of action. The world becomes something that happens to you. Even when you do act, you treat your action as forced. And because you treat it as forced, you do not learn from it. You cannot learn from what you do not own. If you deny your limits, you may feel strong, but you may break against reality. You may push your body past its capacity. You may demand constant certainty from yourself. You may treat rest as weakness. You may treat help as failure. You may ignore grief until it erupts. Then when reality finally stops you, you may feel betrayed, as if the universe broke a promise it never made. The truth is simpler. You are finite. You always were. Bad faith often hides in the sentence, "This is just who I am." Sometimes that sentence is a healthy boundary. It can mean I know my values, I know what I will not do. But often it is a cage disguised as identity. It means I do not want to face the work of change, or I am afraid that if I change, I will lose the only self I know. Or I do not want to risk failing at becoming better, so I protect myself by declaring permanence. Another common hiding place is the sentence, "I am only doing what is expected." Expectation is real. Social pressure is real. But within expectation, there is usually space. You can comply with resentment. You can comply with clarity. You can negotiate. You can refuse. You can comply for now and plan an exit. You can comply while still telling the truth to yourself about what you are doing. Bad faith enters when you pretend expectation removes your responsibility. It does not. It may limit your options. It may raise the cost of certain choices, but it does not erase the fact that you still choose your stance, your timing, and your honesty. It is important to be gentle here. Self-deception is not only a flaw, it is also a form of self-protection. Many people learned bad faith because direct honesty once felt unsafe. If you grew up in an environment where expressing your needs brought punishment, you learned to hide your needs, even from yourself. If you grew up in an environment where failure brought shame, you learned to pretend you never had options, so you could not be blamed. If you grew up in an environment where control was necessary for survival, you learned to deny limits so you could keep functioning. So when you notice bad faith, do not attack yourself. You do not need to. Attacking yourself is another form of avoidance. It replaces insight with drama. Instead, treat bad faith as information, a signal, a clue that you are trying to manage anxiety, guilt, or fear. Once you see the function, you can choose a different strategy. The calmer alternative to bad faith is not brutal self-blame, it is truthful responsibility. Truthful responsibility sounds like this: I did not choose everything, but I choose something. I cannot control the whole situation, but I can control my next step. I cannot guarantee the outcome, but I can act with integrity. I can admit my motives. I can admit my fear. I can admit where I avoid. This kind of honesty can feel like waking up. It can also feel like losing a warm blanket. Bad faith often feels warm because it reduces tension. So when you step out of it, you may feel exposed. That exposure is part of becoming real. Now pause, breathe. Consider one label you carry. It might be a role, a personality description, a family identity, a social category, a job title, a story you repeat about yourself. Choose a label that feels familiar, almost automatic. Hold it gently in your mind. Then ask quietly, where do I have room to move inside this label? Do not rush to answer. The point is to feel the space. Even small space matters. If you are the responsible one, you may have room to ask for help. If you are the strong one, you may have room to admit you are tired. If you are the quiet one, you may have room to speak once, clearly. If you are just a worker, you may have room to work with care or to plan a change or to refuse a boundary violation. If you are just this type of person, you may have room to question whether the type is a story or a sentence. Notice what happens when you sense that room. Anxiety may rise because room implies choice and choice implies responsibility. But relief may also rise because room implies possibility. Bad faith often collapses possibility into inevitability. It makes the future feel fixed. Truthful responsibility reopens the future, not into endless options, but into real, workable options. It returns you to the human condition, where you are neither a machine nor a god. When you stop hiding from freedom, another tension appears. You want meaning. You want the world to make sense. You want your suffering to have a purpose. You want your choices to add up to something coherent, yet the world often feels indifferent. Events happen without explanation. Good people suffer. Bad people succeed. Randomness interrupts plans. Silence answers prayer. The universe does not seem to care in the way a person cares. This tension forms the heart of the absurd. So we move to the next segment, gently, as if stepping from one dark room into another. We move from the strategies of self-deception into the strange collision between the human hunger for meaning and the world's refusal to guarantee it. You search for a sign, not always in a dramatic way. Sometimes it is quiet, almost casual. You look for confirmation that you are on the right path. you look for a signal that what you are doing matters. You want something to line up, something to click, something to reassure you that the confusion has a purpose. You might call it guidance. You might call it fate. You might call it reassurance. You might not call it anything at all. You just want the world to answer back. But the world does not answer, not clearly, not reliably. You try to interpret patterns, but the patterns do not hold. You look for a message in coincidence, but coincidence remains ambiguous. You ask a question with your whole heart, and the response is often silence. The days keep arriving. The tasks continue. People disappoint you. People surprise you. Some things go well. Some things break. The universe keeps moving as if your questions were not even a category it recognizes, and still you keep asking. This persistence is deeply human. It is almost the definition of being human. We do not merely experience events. We interpret them. We do not merely survive. We search for reasons, stories, and meanings. We want our lives to fit into a coherent frame. We want to know what we are for. We want to know what we should do. We want to believe there is a final explanation somewhere, like a hidden chapter at the end of the book that will make everything make sense. The absurd describes what happens when this human hunger meets the world's refusal to satisfy it. The absurd is not a joke. It is not simply a strange feeling. It is a mismatch. On one side, there is the mind that craves clarity, purpose, and final explanations. On the other side, there is the universe, which offers events, patterns, and silence. It offers facts. It offers causes, but not always meaning. It offers sequences, but not always a story. It offers laws, but not always comfort. This does not mean life is worthless. That is an important point to hold gently, because many people confuse the absurd with nihilism. The absurd does not say nothing matters. It says meaning does not arrive prepackaged. It says the universe does not hand you a clear script. It says you may not get a final answer that dissolves all doubt. The absurd can feel like standing in front of a locked door and realizing there may be no key, or realizing that the key does not come from outside. It may have to be made. The absurd often appears in everyday moments, which makes it more unsettling. You can be doing something completely ordinary and suddenly feel a strange distance from it. You are washing dishes and you notice your hands moving automatically. You are walking down a familiar street and everything looks slightly staged, as if the world is a set built for someone else. You are at work and the tasks feel like a loop, repeating without reaching anything final. You are in conversation and you hear yourself speaking, and the words sound like they belong to a role rather than to a living person. In those moments, the normal background of life becomes visible. The routines you usually accept without question become strange, not because they are wrong, but because you suddenly see that you do them without a guaranteed reason. The absurd also appears when you reach a goal and the feeling you expected does not arrive. You chase something for months or years, a promotion, a degree, a relationship, a move to a new place, a financial milestone, a personal transformation. You tell yourself, once I get there, I will feel whole. Once I get there, my life will make sense. Once I get there, I will finally be calm. Then you get there, and for a moment you feel relief, maybe even joy. But soon another feeling rises, a quiet emptiness, a strange question. Is this it? The goal may still matter, it may still improve your life, but the final satisfaction you expected does not settle in permanently. The mind keeps moving, the horizon shifts, new wants appear, new fears appear. The same self that wanted the goal arrives at the destination, and the self is still hungry. This is another face of the absurd. Not the world outside, but the human inside. the gap between what you think will complete you and what actually does. The absurd can lead to despair. It can lead to a sense that nothing matters, that everything is pointless, that your efforts are meaningless in the vastness of time. This reaction makes sense. If you expect the world to give you a final guarantee, then silence feels like rejection. If you expect a cosmic reason, then the absence of one can feel like betrayal. Despair is a form of grief for the meaning you wanted to receive. But the absurd can also lead to honesty. Honesty is quieter than despair. Honesty does not collapse. Honesty looks at the world and says, maybe there is no external script that makes everything clean. Maybe the universe is not built to answer my longing. Maybe meaning is not a gift I will receive. Maybe it is something I must create, maintain, and renew. This is not a cheerful statement. It is not meant to force optimism. It is a sober statement, like acknowledging the weather. It is raining. The universe is silent. The meaning is not guaranteed. Now what? Now you face a choice. If the universe does not hand you meaning, you can stop searching. You can distract yourself until you no longer feel the hunger. You can reduce life to comfort, status, pleasure, or routine. You can decide that questions are a waste of time. You can tell yourself that thinking too deeply only makes you miserable. You can shut the door. Or you can create meaning without pretending it is guaranteed. The second path is subtle. It does not require you to invent fantasies. It requires you to accept uncertainty and still commit to values. It requires you to say, I will love even though love can end. I will build even though the building can fall. I will be kind even though kindness does not always get rewarded. I will seek truth even though truth can be uncomfortable. I will create art even though the universe does not need my art. I will care even though caring makes me vulnerable. This is where existential philosophy becomes practical. It does not solve the universe. It asks how you will live inside a universe that may not solve itself for you. The absurd also changes how you relate to everyday life. If there is no final meaning handed down from above, then meaning becomes local. Meaning becomes something you practice in your actual relationships, your actual work, your actual choices. Meaning becomes something you enact rather than something you wait for. A quiet example might help. Imagine two people doing the same task. One feels the task is meaningless because it does not lead to a grand purpose. The other feels the task can hold meaning because it supports someone, because it expresses care, because it is done with attention rather than resentment. The task is the same. The meaning is different. The difference comes from stance and value, not from cosmic endorsement. This can sound like you are simply telling yourself a story, and in a way, you are, but that does not make it fake. Humans live by stories. The question is whether the story is honest. An honest story admits uncertainty. It admits finitude. It admits that the universe does not promise you anything. Then it chooses anyway. Take a moment to reflect on a time you achieved something and still felt unsettled. Do not analyze it like a problem. Just remember the feeling. The quiet emptiness, the slight confusion, the sense that you arrived and yet did not arrive. That feeling often points toward the absurd. It is the feeling of expecting the world to fill an inner hunger and realizing the world does not work that way. Now breathe slowly. If you are listening to this as you fall asleep, you do not need to fix anything tonight. You do not need to make a life plan. You do not need to force meaning into every corner of your existence. You only need to recognize the shape of the problem and the possibility hidden inside it. The possibility is this: if meaning is not delivered from outside, you are not powerless. You are invited into authorship, not total control, not certainty, but authorship. And once you accept that, another question appears almost naturally, like the next step in the mind's quiet walk. If meaning is not delivered from outside, can faith fill the gap? Not only religious faith, not only belief in a God, faith as trust in something beyond proof. Trust in your values even when you cannot guarantee outcomes. Trust in love even when love is fragile. Trust that your choices can matter even without cosmic confirmation. That leads us to the next segment, the idea of the leap, the moment where reason reaches its edge and you step anyway. At some point you act without full certainty. This is not a dramatic announcement. It is not a moment where the lights shift and a narrator says, "Now you leap." It happens quietly in ordinary life, often without recognition. You commit, you love, you choose a direction, you forgive. You accept a job, you leave a job, you move to a new place. You stay, you begin again after you thought you were done. You decide to trust someone, even though you cannot fully know what they will do tomorrow. You decide to trust yourself, even though you have disappointed yourself before. You cannot fully prove the future. This is a simple fact that your mind resists. The mind wants guarantees. It wants certainty before it acts, because certainty feels like safety. But the structure of life refuses to cooperate. Every real decision includes unknowns. Every meaningful commitment happens in the presence of risk. Even the most careful planning still leaves gaps. And into those gaps you step. Existential thinkers call this step the leap. The leap is not necessarily religious, though it is often discussed in religious contexts. It is not necessarily dramatic, though it can feel dramatic from the inside. The leap describes any decision made beyond complete rational certainty. It is what happens when you gather reasons, weigh evidence, think deeply, and still reach a boundary where calculation ends but life continues. At that boundary, you either remain frozen, waiting for certainty that will not arrive, or you act anyway. You choose anyway. You commit anyway. The leap does not reject reason. It admits reason has limits. This matters because people often misunderstand the idea. They think a leap means turning off the mind and choosing blindly. But the deeper meaning is almost the opposite. The leap begins with reason. You investigate. You ask questions. You look at patterns. You try to be responsible. Then you discover that even with your best thinking, there is still uncertainty. The leap is the act of living after you have done what reason can do. You can feel this in the simplest parts of life. Every time you schedule something for next week, you assume you will be alive next week. You cannot prove it. You assume it anyway. Every time you fall asleep, you trust that you will wake up. You cannot guarantee it. You trust anyway. Even this right now is a kind of leap, listening to a voice in the dark, letting words guide your mind, trusting that the next breath will come and the next. We live by leaps more often than we admit, but we do not always call them leaps. Sometimes we call them decisions. Sometimes we call them commitments. Sometimes we call them hope. Sometimes we call them faith, even if we do not use religious language. Sometimes we call them love. Love is one of the clearest examples. To love someone is to invest in a future you cannot control. You can observe their character. You can learn their patterns. You can have conversations. You can build trust slowly, but you can never fully guarantee the outcome. You cannot prove that they will always be kind. You cannot prove that they will stay. You cannot prove that life will not change them. You love anyway. That is a leap. Starting again is another example. Imagine you failed at something and it hurt. The mind learns a lesson. It says, do not risk that pain again. Stay safe, stay small. But then, eventually, you try again. You apply again. You speak again. You open again. You begin again. You do not do it because you are certain you will succeed. You do it because something inside you refuses to reduce life to fear. That is a leap. The leap is significant because it challenges a common belief, the belief that you must feel sure before you act. Many people wait for a feeling of certainty that rarely arrives. They tell themselves, once I feel confident, then I will start. Once I feel ready, then I will commit. Once I understand everything, then I will move. They treat certainty as a prerequisite for action. But certainty is not a reliable resource. It comes and goes. It can be false. It can be inflated by excitement or deflated by anxiety. If you require certainty, you often end up trapped in delay. The leap suggests another approach. It says you do not need perfect certainty to act. You need enough clarity to take responsibility. You need enough honesty to acknowledge the risk. You need enough courage to accept the unknown. This does not mean acting recklessly. It means acting with awareness. It means seeing the gap between what you know and what you want to know, then stepping into that gap with open eyes. The leap also raises a risk that cannot be ignored. Leaps can lead to growth, but also to mistakes. This is why the leap feels scary. If you leap, you might be wrong. You might choose badly. You might waste time. You might get hurt. You might disappoint yourself. You might have to start over. These possibilities are real. Existential philosophy does not promise safety. It asks for honesty. It asks you to look at the risk without exaggeration and without denial. Some people respond to this by trying to eliminate risk entirely. They structure their lives to avoid uncertainty. They avoid commitments. They avoid vulnerability. They avoid choices that might lead to regret. This can create a smooth surface. It can also create a quiet emptiness. Because when you avoid risk completely, you also avoid depth. You avoid the kind of experiences that give life texture and meaning. The leap offers a different kind of stability. Not the stability of guaranteed outcomes, but the stability of integrity. The stability of being able to say, I chose with care. I chose with awareness. I chose with honesty. Even if it hurts later, I did not hide from my life. This is a subtle but powerful shift. It changes the goal from being right to being real. It changes the goal from perfect outcomes to responsible participation. There is also another aspect of the leap that often gets missed. The leap does not happen once. You leap repeatedly. You leap into relationships. You leap into projects. You leap into new identities. You leap into forgiveness. You leap into the decision to rest when your old pattern is to overwork. You leap into the decision to stop harming yourself with harsh inner speech. You leap into the decision to speak truth in a situation where silence would protect you. These leaps can be small, but they still matter because they still involve stepping beyond certainty. If you think about it, even the decision to change your mind is a leap. Changing your mind means admitting that your previous certainty was incomplete. It means accepting that you can revise your story. It means stepping into a new understanding without knowing how it will reshape your life. This is why the leap is tied to faith in a broad sense. Faith here means trust beyond proof. It means trusting your values enough to act, trusting that your effort matters even without guarantee, trusting that honesty is better than denial, trusting that life is worth participating in even when the universe stays silent. Pause here. Notice how often you live by leaps already. Let your mind scan gently through your day. You trust the floor to hold you. You trust people to follow basic social rules. You trust your body to function. You trust a friend's message means what it says. You trust that tomorrow will come, at least enough to make plans. These are small leaps. They are so normal you forget they are leaps. But they reveal something important. You already know how to live without proof. You already do it. Breathe slowly. Let this realization calm you instead of alarming you. If you already live this way, then uncertainty is not an exception. It is the rule, and you have been handling it quietly all along. Now consider what changes when you accept the leap as part of life. You stop waiting for perfect certainty. You stop treating doubt as a signal that you must not act. You learn to treat doubt as part of reality. You learn to act with doubt in your pocket, not as an enemy, but as a reminder to stay humble and attentive. You become more patient with yourself because you realize that every meaningful step includes unknowns. This does not erase anxiety, it transforms it. Anxiety becomes less like a warning siren and more like background weather. It is present but not always in control. And once you accept uncertainty, another question appears. It is not a question about the future. It is a question about the shape of your life as a whole. What if the deepest test of your life is not one decision, but repetition? What if the true measure of your choices is whether you could live them again? What if you had to repeat your life, not as a metaphor, but as a thought experiment that reveals what you truly affirm? That leads to the next segment, eternal recurrence. The strange idea that asks you to look at your life not as a single line, but as something you might be asked to live again and again. Picture this. A messenger appears, not with drama, not with thunder, but with the calm certainty of someone delivering a fact. The messenger does not threaten you. The messenger does not comfort you. The messenger simply tells you what will happen. You will live your life again, not a better version, not a corrected version, not a version where you avoid the mistakes and keep only the joys. The same life, exactly as it has been. Every joy, every regret, every ordinary day, every awkward conversation, every quiet win, every moment you forgot 5 minutes later, every moment that shaped you without your noticing. The same childhood, the same choices, the same losses, the same small habits that formed your character, the same roads taken and not taken. And then the messenger adds one more detail. You will live it again endlessly. This idea is called eternal recurrence. It can sound like a strange myth, like a cosmic loop. It can sound like a theory about time, but its real power is not in physics. Its real power is psychological. It is a thought experiment, a test, a mirror held up to your life. Eternal recurrence asks a simple question with sharp edges. Can you affirm your life, not only its highlights, but the whole of it? Can you say yes to your life as it is, including the parts you wish had never happened? This is not an easy question. That is why it works. Most people relate to life selectively. They cling to certain memories and try to bury others. They celebrate certain traits and hide others. They fantasize about alternate versions of themselves. They think, if only I had done this, if only I had not done that, if only I had met different people, if only I had been born elsewhere, if only I had been stronger. They live with a quiet sense of unfinished argument with the past. Eternal recurrence interrupts that argument by removing the fantasy of revision. It says, imagine you do not get to rewrite. Imagine you do not get to correct. Imagine you do not get to escape the ordinary, the embarrassing, the painful. Imagine you must live it all again. How do you feel? The first response is often resistance, a tightening in the chest, a rush of protest. No, that would be unbearable. That would be torture. I could not. This resistance is not meaningless. It points to something. It points to the places where you feel trapped, resentful, or unaligned. If the thought of repeating your life fills you with dread, it reveals areas where you feel you have not lived as yourself. It reveals where you feel you have been sleepwalking. It reveals where you have been carrying a role that does not fit, or a habit that drains you, or a fear that keeps you small. Eternal recurrence is not mainly about whether the universe actually repeats. It is about evaluation. It is about asking what you truly accept. It is about asking whether you are living a life you would choose if you had to choose it again. This can feel harsh, and it is meant to be sharp, but it does not have to be cruel. The purpose is not to punish you for what you regret. The purpose is to clarify what matters. Some people misunderstand this idea and think it demands constant happiness, as if the only acceptable life is a life with no pain. But pain is part of being human. Loss is part of being human. Failure is part of being human. Eternal recurrence does not ask you to erase suffering. It asks whether you can integrate it. It asks whether you can see your life as a whole, not as a list of mistakes, but as a story that formed you. There is a deeper question inside the thought experiment. What does it mean to say yes to life? Saying yes does not mean approving of harm. It does not mean pretending your wounds were gifts. It means recognizing that your life is yours, not a hypothetical life that could have been. It means accepting that you are made of what happened and what you did. It means refusing to waste your present by arguing endlessly with your past. In that sense, eternal recurrence becomes a discipline. It teaches you to stop living in the shadow of imagined alternatives. It brings you back to the only place where choice is real. Now, because if you take the thought experiment seriously, it creates a practical question. If I want a life I could accept repeating, what do I do today? Not in a grand, dramatic way. Not in a way that demands you reinvent everything at once. In small ways, where life is actually shaped. Maybe you choose to stop speaking to yourself with cruelty. If you had to live that inner cruelty again forever, would you keep it? Or would you choose a different tone? A tone that is honest but not violent. Maybe you choose to tell the truth in a situation where you usually perform. If you had to repeat the performance forever, would you keep acting? Or would you want one moment of clarity, one moment of alignment, even if it costs you something? Maybe you choose to pay attention to the people who matter, not only as a duty, but as a real presence. If you had to relive your life, would you want more moments of genuine connection? Then create one tonight or tomorrow, even briefly. Maybe you choose to stop postponing a life you keep promising yourself. Not because you can control everything, but because you can take one step. If you had to repeat your avoidance forever, would you accept it? If not, what is one move that breaks the loop? Eternal recurrence has power because it transforms time into a mirror. Instead of thinking what will happen next, you ask, what would I be willing to repeat? It measures your life not by success, but by affirmation, not by how impressive it looks, but by whether it feels true. This idea can also soften your relationship with regret. Regret often carries a fantasy of control. It imagines you could go back and fix everything. Eternal recurrence does not give you that fantasy. It offers something else. It offers the possibility of making peace with your life by living it more consciously now. It suggests that the point is not to erase the past, but to stop adding new layers of unconscious living. If you are listening to this while drifting towards sleep, you do not need to treat this as a demand. You can treat it as a gentle question, a quiet check-in. Not to judge yourself, but to notice where life feels alive and where it feels drained. Take a moment to reflect on one part of your day that feels most alive. It might be small, the first sip of water when you are thirsty, a short conversation where you felt seen, a moment of focus where time passed quickly, a walk where your body felt present, a piece of music that made your chest loosen, a moment of laughter, a moment of calm. Now reflect on one part of your day that feels most drained. Again, it might be small, a task you avoid, a conversation that leaves you tense, a habit that dulls you, a scroll that does not satisfy, a responsibility you carry with resentment, a performance you maintain, a fear that keeps repeating the same story. Just notice, there is also a quieter implication. If you could accept your life repeating, that acceptance can create peace. Not the peace of everything being perfect, but the peace of being at home in your own existence. The peace of no longer needing to escape yourself. The peace of living with enough alignment that you can say yes, even to imperfection. But the moment you begin to treat your life as something you could repeat, another puzzle arrives almost automatically. If your choices matter this much, do you truly choose them? Or do causes choose for you? Biology, childhood, culture, habit, chance. If your life could repeat, maybe it repeats because it could never have been different. Maybe freedom is an illusion. Maybe your sense of choice is only a feeling layered on top of causation. This is where the next segment begins. Repetition leads to the paradox of free will. The question of whether you are an author or a character written by forces you do not control. And if you are both, where the boundary lies. You feel like you choose. You reach for a glass of water. You decide what to say in a conversation. You choose whether to respond to a message now or later. You choose whether to hold back or speak honestly. In these moments, choice feels direct. It feels intimate. It feels like the most obvious fact about being alive. You are the one doing it. You are the one steering. And yet, if you look closely, you also see causes everywhere. Your body influences your mood. Hunger changes your patience. Sleep changes your optimism. Hormones shift your emotions without asking permission. Your childhood leaves traces in how you trust, how you defend yourself, how you interpret other people's faces and silences. Your culture shapes what you think is normal, what you think is shameful, what you think is admirable. Your habits push you along familiar paths, sometimes without conscious thought. Chance interrupts your plans and redirects your life. Even the language you speak shapes what you notice and what you can easily express. So where does freedom begin? This question is not just philosophical entertainment. It matters because it touches guilt, responsibility, forgiveness, and hope. If you are not free at all, then blame feels misplaced. If you are completely free, then every failure becomes your fault. If you are partly free, then life becomes a complicated balance between accountability and compassion. This balance is the paradox of free will. The paradox is that you experience yourself as an agent, but you also experience yourself as shaped. You feel like an author, but you also feel like a product. You feel like you can choose, but you also feel like you are pushed. Philosophers have debated this for centuries, and the debate often gathers around three broad positions. One position is determinism. Determinism says every event follows prior causes. If you knew the full state of the universe at one moment, and you knew the laws governing it, then in principle you could predict what happens next. On this view, your choices are not exceptions. They are events in your brain and body that follow from prior conditions. You choose because certain neurons fire, because your genetics and experience formed certain preferences, because your environment presents certain options, because you learned certain patterns. The choice feels like choice, but it is still part of the causal chain. Another position is libertarian freedom, sometimes called libertarianism about free will, not political libertarianism. This view says some choices break causal chains. It says there is something in the act of choosing that is not fully determined by prior causes. It might be a non-physical mind, or a special kind of agency, or a capacity to initiate actions in a way that cannot be reduced to physics. The idea is that at least some decisions are genuinely open. You could have done otherwise in a strong sense, not just in a hypothetical sense. A third position is compatibilism. Compatibilism says freedom can exist within causation. It argues that you do not need to break causal chains to be free in the way that matters. Instead, freedom can mean that your actions flow from your values, your reasons, and your character rather than from external coercion or manipulation. On this view, you can be caused and still be responsible, as long as the causes run through you in the right way. Your decision can be determined and still be yours. In everyday life, you usually care less about metaphysics and more about responsibility, change, and regret. You care about whether it makes sense to blame someone who did harm. You care about whether it makes sense to feel guilty for a mistake. You care about whether you can change a habit. You care about whether you can become a different person. You care about whether your choices mean anything if they are caused. You care about whether forgiveness is possible, whether self-forgiveness is possible, and whether hope is rational. This is where the paradox moves from theory into the heart. If everything is determined, guilt can soften. You may see yourself as part of a chain, not as a solitary origin. You may treat your past choices with more compassion. You may say, I did what I did because I was that person in that situation with those limitations. This can be relieving, especially if you carry heavy shame. It can also support forgiveness toward others because it reminds you that people are shaped by conditions they did not choose. But determinism can also threaten meaning. If every act is inevitable, then why strive? Why choose? Why work on yourself? Why take responsibility? The mind may begin to treat life as a script already written. Even if you still feel emotions, you might feel less ownership. You might feel like a spectator inside your own life. On the other hand, if freedom is total, responsibility expands. You become fully accountable for every decision. This can feel empowering at first. It can make you feel like you are the author of your life. It can motivate change. It can encourage courage. But total freedom can also grow into shame. If you believe you are the complete origin of every outcome, you may treat your failures as proof of your worthlessness. You may ignore how much your body, your history, and your environment shaped you. You may carry an impossible burden, like trying to be a god who created themselves from nothing. Compatibilism offers a middle path. It focuses on alignment. On this approach, the key question is not, did your choice break the laws of physics? The key question is, did your action express you? Did it express your values, your reasons, your considered commitments? Or did it happen because you were pushed by something you did not endorse, like coercion, manipulation, addiction, panic, or a habit you cannot interrupt? This view fits everyday experience in a gentle way. You know the difference between acting under threat and acting freely. You know the difference between a choice made with clarity and a choice made in a fog of compulsion. You know the difference between a decision that reflects your deeper values and a decision that reflects a momentary impulse you later regret. Compatibilism says that freedom grows as you become more reflective, more aware, more able to act according to values you choose rather than patterns that choose you. This is where free will becomes practical again. Instead of being a distant debate, it becomes a question about how you live. You may not be able to step outside causation, but you can shape the causes inside you. You can cultivate certain habits. You can practice certain responses. You can weaken patterns that harm you. You can build patterns that support you. You can create environments that make good choices easier. You can seek relationships that bring out your better qualities. You can learn, heal, and grow. In this sense, you become a cause. Not an uncaused cause, but a cause within the chain, a node that can redirect the flow. This is why the paradox of free will can be calming rather than terrifying. It suggests you do not need absolute metaphysical freedom to live responsibly. You need workable freedom. You need enough freedom to reflect, to choose, and to revise. Now there is a subtle twist. Even the desire to revise might be caused. Even the moment of awakening might be caused. Something you heard, something you suffered, something you loved. A loss that forced you to look at life differently. A book, a conversation, a failure, a quiet moment at night. From a deterministic view, even your transformation has causes. But that does not make it less meaningful. It may actually make it more meaningful because it shows that growth is part of reality too. Change is not outside the chain. Change is inside it. A person can become more patient. A person can become more honest. A person can become kinder. These shifts may have causes, but they are still real. They still shape the future. They still matter. So perhaps the question is not, am I free in an absolute cosmic sense? Perhaps the question is, how can I increase the kind of freedom that makes life better? The freedom to act with integrity. The freedom to stop repeating harm. The freedom to choose with awareness rather than with automatic fear. Pause here. Ask yourself one calm question. What kind of causes do I want to become? Do not answer quickly. Let it be a quiet inquiry, like placing your hand on the surface of a lake. The question is not asking you to control the whole future. It is asking you to consider what direction you want your influence to take. Do you want to become a cause of calm in tense situations? Do you want to become a cause of honesty? Do you want to become a cause of stability for others? Do you want to become a cause of creativity? Do you want to become a cause of healing for yourself and for the people around you? Do you want to become a cause of less harm? Let the question settle. Breathe. Now notice what happens when you ask it. The focus shifts. You are no longer trapped in abstract debate. You are no longer trying to prove a metaphysical point. You are attending to what you can shape. You are asking how you can live. And once you ask who you are trying to be, you run into a deeper mystery. What is the self that chooses at all? Is the self stable? like a core that remains the same across time? Or is it assembled moment by moment from memory, habit, story, and social reflection? If your choices express your values, where do those values come from? If you want to become a cause, what is the you that wants? This leads to the next segment, identity, the self as a story, the self as a pattern, the self as something both real and changing, like a river that stays the same name while the water moves on. You say I, as if it were a single stable thing. I am tired. I want this. I remember that. I regret this. I hope for that. The word feels simple, almost too simple. It feels like a solid handle you can grab. But if you slow down and look closely, the I becomes strange. The I of childhood and the I of today do not share the same body cells, the same beliefs, or the same fears. The child who once thought the world was endless is not the adult who measures time differently. The teenager who felt everything intensely is not the person who now knows how numbness can protect you. The version of you from 5 years ago might feel like a stranger in certain ways, and yet you still call all of them me. So what holds the self together? One answer that appears again and again in philosophy and psychology is that identity is not a single unchanging substance. Identity is narrative. Identity is the story you tell, and the story your mind keeps telling, even when you are not paying attention. A narrative self is not a fictional self. It is real in the way a pattern is real. It is real in the way a melody is real. A melody is not a single note. It is the relationship between notes across time. If you take away the sequence, you lose the melody. In the same way, the self is not a single moment. It is the relationship between moments. It is the pattern that persists through change. You connect memories, goals, and values into a continuing story. You remember certain events and forget others. You highlight certain moments as turning points. You choose explanations for why things happened. You select motives that make sense of your actions. You build a sense of direction, even if your life sometimes feels directionless. This weaving is so automatic that you rarely notice it, but it is happening all the time. Continuity comes from patterns, not from an unchanging core. You keep certain habits. You keep certain ways of reacting. You keep certain desires. You keep certain fears. Even when your beliefs change, you often recognize a familiar emotional style. Even when your environment changes, you may replay the same inner scripts. The brain is a pattern-making organ. It tries to create coherence because coherence helps you survive. A coherent self makes the world easier to navigate. If you did not feel like the same person from one day to the next, you would struggle to plan, to promise, to love, to commit. But the narrative self is not only something you carry, it is also something you edit. You revise your story, you reinterpret past events, you rename who you were. This is one of the strangest human capacities. Two people can live through the same event and tell completely different stories about it. Even you can live through one event and tell different stories about it at different ages. A failure you once saw as shameful might later become the moment you learned resilience. A relationship you once saw as romantic might later be seen as controlling. A sacrifice you once wore proudly might later feel like a loss of self. The facts may not change, but the meaning changes. And because meaning shapes identity, you change too. This is why the self as a story can be healing. If you are not locked into a fixed essence, then growth is possible. If your identity is partly narrative, then you can learn to tell the truth more clearly. You can stop interpreting everything as proof that you are unworthy. You can stop interpreting every mistake as a final verdict. You can revise the role you assign yourself. You can move from being the helpless character in your story to being the character who learns, who chooses, who adapts. This does not mean inventing comforting lies. Healing does not require denial. Healing often requires more honesty, not less. It requires seeing what happened without distortion. It requires acknowledging pain without turning pain into identity. It requires saying, yes, that happened, and it affected me, but it is not the only thing I am. But the self as a story can also distort. A story can trap you. If you keep repeating the same interpretation, you can become imprisoned by it. You can turn a single chapter into the entire book. You can say, I am the person who always fails. I am the person people leave. I am the person who cannot trust. I am the person who must always be strong. These sentences sound like descriptions, but they often function like spells. They shrink your future by defining it in advance. Sometimes the distortion comes from the need for coherence. The mind would rather have a painful, clear story than an unclear, open story. It would rather say the world is against me than admit some things are random and I do not understand them. It would rather say I am broken than admit I am complex and still becoming. A story gives you a sense of control, even if it is a story of defeat. Sometimes the distortion comes from pride. The mind wants to see itself as good, competent, special, or right. So it edits the story to protect the ego. It ignores certain harms. It explains away certain patterns. It turns other people into villains or fools so that the self can remain clean. This is also a kind of narrative distortion, and it also traps you because it prevents learning. The narrative self is powerful because it sits at the center of your experience. It shapes what you notice. It shapes what you remember. It shapes what you expect. It shapes what you believe you deserve. It shapes what you think is possible. This is why existential philosophy pays attention to stories. Not because stories are imaginary, but because stories are the medium through which a human life becomes coherent. And if the self is partly story, then the question becomes practical again. What kind of story are you living inside? What kind of story are you writing with your choices? Take a moment to reflect on a memory you tell often. It might be a memory you share with friends. It might be a memory you repeat in your own head. It might be a story about success. It might be a story about betrayal. It might be a story about embarrassment. It might be a story about struggle. Hold the memory gently without forcing detail. Now ask, what role do I assign myself in this story? Do you cast yourself as the hero who overcame, the victim who had no choice, the villain who ruined things, the fool who did not understand, the survivor who endured, the caretaker who carried everyone, the invisible one who was never seen? Notice the role without judgment. The role may have been necessary at the time. It may have protected you. It may have helped you make sense of chaos. But ask quietly whether the role still fits. Ask whether the role still serves your growth. Ask whether you are allowed to revise it. Revision does not mean pretending the past was different. It means telling the truth with more depth. It means allowing multiple truths to coexist. It means admitting you were limited and still responsible. It means admitting you were harmed and still capable of choosing a future that is not defined by harm. If you are listening while drifting toward sleep, let this reflection be gentle. You do not need to dig into pain tonight. You do not need to solve your identity. You only need to notice that I is not a simple object. It is a living process. It is something you participate in. And once you realize the self is partly constructed, another curiosity arises. If you construct your identity from the inside, how does it look from the outside? How do other people see you? Do they meet your true self, or only a mask? And beyond that, a deeper question appears. Can you ever truly know another mind? Can they ever truly know yours? That brings us to the next segment, the gaze and the problem of other minds. You cannot feel another person's thoughts directly. You can sit beside someone you love, close enough to hear their breathing, and still you cannot enter their mind. You can watch their face, listen to their words, notice their pauses, and still the inner experience remains hidden. You infer, you guess, you hope, and sometimes you miss. This distance is one of the quiet facts of human life. We forget it during routine conversation because language creates the illusion of direct access. Someone says, "I'm fine," and you accept it or you doubt it, but either way you remain outside the actual feeling. Someone laughs and you interpret the laugh, but you do not feel what they feel. Someone cries and you can feel empathy, but empathy is still your own experience, not theirs. The philosophical name for this puzzle is the problem of other minds. It asks a simple question that becomes strange when you stare at it. How do you know anyone else experiences consciousness? How do you know the people around you are not empty machines performing human behavior without an inner life? How do you know they feel pain, joy, fear, and meaning the way you do? In everyday life, you do not walk around doubting everyone's consciousness. You assume it. You treat people as real inner beings. You respond to their emotions. You cooperate. You argue. You love. The world would be unlivable if you constantly questioned whether other minds exist. But the philosophical question points to something real. You never have direct proof. You cannot access another person's experience the way you access your own. You only have signs, language, behavior, shared situations, expressions, patterns. You learn what certain words usually mean. You learn what certain gestures usually indicate. You recognize yourself in others. You think, when I look that way, I feel this way, so maybe they feel something similar. This is not irrational. It is practical. It is how life works. You build understanding through a slow process of interpretation. You notice whether someone's actions match their words. You notice whether their mood changes in predictable ways. You notice what calms them, what irritates them, what excites them. You learn their rhythms. Over time, you form a model of their inner world. It is never complete, but it becomes good enough to allow trust, intimacy, and cooperation. Still, the distance remains. And existential thinkers add something important to this conversation. They say the distance is not only about knowing others, it is also about knowing yourself. You become aware of yourself through others. Other people do not simply exist beside you. They shape the way you experience your own existence. A look from someone can change how you feel in your own skin. You have probably felt this, even if you have never named it. You walk into a room and notice someone watching you. Suddenly you become aware of your posture, your voice, your expression. You begin to see yourself as an object in someone else's world. You feel exposed. You feel judged. Or you feel admired. Or you feel embarrassed. The feeling changes depending on the situation, but the mechanism is similar. The gaze of another person can pull you out of your private flow and make you self-conscious. This is not always negative. Sometimes the gaze feels like recognition. A friend looks at you with warmth and you feel more real. A teacher looks at you with belief and you feel more capable. A partner looks at you with care and you feel safe. But even these positive experiences reveal the same truth. The self is partly social. You do not only exist for yourself, you exist in a field of other minds. This social field can be supportive, but it can also be exhausting. If you constantly feel watched, you may begin to perform. You may start living for the imagined judgment of others. You may lose touch with what you want, become focused on what will be approved. This can create a quiet alienation where your life looks fine from the outside but feels distant from the inside. The problem of other minds also creates loneliness. Even surrounded by people, you remain inside your perspective. You can share stories, share meals, share beds, share years, and still there is a boundary you cannot cross. No matter how close you become, you never fully merge. There is always an inner distance. Sometimes this distance feels like freedom. You remain a separate person with a private world. Sometimes it feels like isolation. You want to be fully understood, and you cannot guarantee it. This loneliness can show up in strange moments. You can laugh with friends and suddenly feel the gap. You can speak honestly and feel that your words still fail to capture the full truth. You can be in love and still feel that your inner life is ultimately untranslatable, not because you are flawed, but because experience is richer than language. At the same time, the distance between minds can create responsibility. If you cannot fully know others, you must treat them with care, not certainty. You must resist the temptation to reduce them to a simple story. You must resist assuming you know their motives. You must resist labeling them quickly. You must remember that behind their behavior there may be fear, pain, confusion, or history you cannot see. This does not mean you tolerate harm. Care is not the same as enabling. It means you approach people with humility. You accept that your perspective is partial. You recognize that your interpretation might be wrong. You speak with a little less arrogance. You listen with a little more patience. This shift can change relationships. Many conflicts grow worse because people treat their assumptions as facts. They assume they know what the other person meant, and they respond to the assumed meaning rather than to the actual person. Humility about other minds does not solve every conflict, but it reduces unnecessary cruelty. It can also change how you treat yourself. If you understand that other people cannot fully access your inner world, you may stop expecting perfect understanding from them. You may still seek connection, but you stop demanding that another person complete you. You become more responsible for translating yourself, for asking clearly, for setting boundaries, for seeking support from more than one source, rather than placing the entire weight of your inner world on a single relationship. Now pause. Think of someone you know, not an abstract person, a real person, someone you see regularly or someone you remember well. Imagine they carry a full inner world as complex as yours. They have private fears, private hopes, small memories that still affect them, small joys that keep them going. They may have regrets they do not speak about. They may have dreams they feel embarrassed to admit. They may have a constant internal conversation just like you do. Let that thought soften you. Softening does not mean becoming passive. It means becoming human. It means seeing other people not as obstacles or tools, but as centers of experience, each one living inside their own unseen room, each one trying to make sense of what is happening. And if you sit with this long enough, you may notice something else. The distance between minds often makes you turn inward. You realize you are alone inside your perspective. Then another question rises. How does time shape consciousness? Why does the present slip away as you notice it? Why does memory feel like a different world? Why does the future pull your mind forward even when you want to stay still? How does time, not clock time, but lived time, shape what it feels like to exist? That leads to the next segment: time, impermanence, and the slipping present. Try to hold a moment still. Pick any moment, this one, right now as you listen. Try to freeze it like taking a photograph with your mind. Try to keep the exact feeling, the exact sound, the exact internal atmosphere. You will notice something immediately. The moment moves even as you try to hold it. The attempt itself proves the point. The present slips away while you name it. The instant you say now, it becomes then. This is time, not as a number on a clock, but as lived experience. A clock tells you what time it is. It divides the day into units. It makes time look stable, measurable, almost mechanical. But your inner life does not experience time like a clock. Your mind experiences time as stretching and folding. An hour in a boring meeting feels longer than an hour in a good conversation. A week of waiting can feel endless. A year of routine can vanish in memory. Time is not just something outside you. Time is something you feel. This difference matters because existential philosophy cares about how existence is experienced, not only what exists, and time shapes experience more deeply than almost anything else. Your mind compresses years into memories. You can remember a whole childhood summer as a single warm image. You can remember a relationship as a handful of scenes. You can summarize a decade in a few sentences, not because the decade was simple, but because memory condenses. Memory selects. Memory edits. It keeps what matters to the story you tell yourself and lets the rest fade into the background. At the same time, your mind stretches minutes into waiting. 5 minutes can feel like an hour when you are anxious. A short silence can feel heavy when you are embarrassed. A few seconds before someone replies can feel like a long corridor you must walk alone. This stretching is not irrational. It is the body reacting. It is attention magnifying the moment. When you are threatened, time slows because your system is scanning for danger. When you are bored, time slows because nothing pulls you forward. When you are absorbed, time speeds up because attention is fully engaged. So time has two faces, the external time of measurement and the internal time of meaning. This internal time is where impermanence becomes undeniable. Impermanence means everything changes. Bodies change. Relationships change. Certainties change. Even your mood changes while you listen. You may have started this segment feeling alert. Now you may feel calmer, or more reflective, or a little sleepy. The shift happens quietly, but it happens. The mind is never perfectly still. The body is never perfectly still. Life is always moving. Bodies change in obvious ways. The body grows. The body heals. The body ages. The body learns new patterns. The body accumulates injuries and scars. The body becomes familiar in some ways and surprising in others. Even when you feel the same, your cells renew. Your nervous system rewires. Your posture changes. Your face changes slowly, like a landscape changing through seasons. Relationships change too. Sometimes they deepen. Sometimes they drift. Sometimes they break. Sometimes they transform into something quieter. Sometimes they end suddenly, leaving you with a shock of absence. A friend who was once close becomes a voice you rarely hear. A stranger becomes essential. A person you thought would always be there disappears from your daily life. Impermanence does not only mean change in general. It means the specific changes you did not predict. Certainties change as well. Beliefs you once held firmly become complicated. Dreams you once chased lose their power. Ideas you once dismissed become meaningful. You grow, and growth changes what you consider normal. You learn more, and learning changes what you can ignore. Even your sense of identity changes, because identity is partly made of what you believe. Impermanence can cause grief. That is one of its most honest effects. You grieve not only when something ends, but when something changes beyond recognition. You grieve the version of yourself that no longer exists. You grieve the time you cannot return to. You grieve the innocence you lost, even if losing it made you wiser. You grieve the simplicity that fades as your understanding deepens. Sometimes you grieve without a clear object. You just feel a quiet sadness that everything passes. This grief is not a mistake. It is a response to reality. But impermanence can also reduce fear. This is the strange part. The same fact that causes grief can also bring relief. If nothing stays fixed, then pain does not stay fixed either. If everything moves, then even the worst moment is not eternal. The feeling you have now, whether it is anxiety, heaviness, or restlessness, will change. It may return later in a different form, but it will not remain exactly as it is. The body does not hold one emotion forever. The mind does not stay in one season forever. This can be soothing, especially at night. If you feel stuck in a feeling, impermanence whispers, you will not feel this way forever. Not because life will become perfect, but because time moves. The tide shifts. The nervous system settles. The story changes. Some existential approaches treat awareness of time as a call to live more intentionally, not faster, more honestly. Modern life often turns time into a resource to exploit. People talk about saving time, wasting time, spending time. This language makes time feel like money, but existential thinking points toward a different relationship. Time is not only a resource, time is your life. Each hour is not a unit you own. It is a piece of existence you inhabit, then lose. To live intentionally, then, does not mean rushing to fill time with achievements. It means aligning your time with your values. It means noticing what you repeatedly give your hours to. It means asking whether your days match what you claim matters. It means being honest about what you avoid, because avoidance is also a use of time. This kind of intentionality is quieter than hustle. It is less about doing more and more about doing what is true. It is less about impressing and more about being present. Take a moment to reflect on how your breath moves through time. In, out, simple, continuous. Each inhale begins, fills, then ends. Each exhale begins, empties, then ends. You do not force time forward. It moves through you anyway. The breath is a small demonstration of impermanence. It shows you that the present is not a fixed point. It is a flow, and you are part of the flow. As you notice the breath, you may notice how the mind keeps trying to hold moments. It wants to freeze comfort. It wants to avoid discomfort. It wants to stay in certainty, but time does not obey those wishes. Time keeps moving. This can feel like a loss. It can also be a release. You do not have to hold everything. You cannot. You can participate, then let go. And once you feel time as flow, it leads naturally to mortality. If your time is limited, then death shapes every choice, even when you avoid thinking about it. You may not talk about death often. You may push it away. But it stands quietly at the edge of every plan, every relationship, every identity. Not as a threat, but as a boundary that gives life its shape. Now we approach the next segment, being toward death. The existential idea that death is not only an event at the end, but a presence that influences how you live right now. You do not think about death every day. Most days you think about what is immediate, what you need to do, what you need to fix, what you need to avoid. what you want to become. Death sits somewhere far in the background, like a distant horizon you rarely look at directly. You may know it intellectually, but you do not feel it in your hands. You walk through life as if tomorrow is normal, as if next month is assumed, as if time is a wide road that continues. And yet the fact of death quietly frames every day. It frames your choices even when you do not name it. It frames your urgency, your hesitation, your longing, your fear. It frames the way you hold people close and the way you postpone certain conversations. It frames the way you chase approval and the way you sometimes suddenly stop caring about approval. It frames the sadness you feel when a year passes quickly. It frames the sweetness you feel in small moments that seem ordinary until you realize they are not guaranteed. Existential philosophy often treats death as the most personal boundary, not because death is the most dramatic event, but because it is the boundary you cannot outsource. Nobody can die for you. People can help you live. People can support you in illness. People can sit beside you in grief. But the experience of your death, whatever it is yours alone. In that sense, death is the most individual fact of your life. It is the one event you cannot hand over. It is the final boundary that makes you irreducibly you. This boundary gives your life a contour. A contour is a shape. Without contours, things blur. They become endless. They lose definition. Death gives your life definition not by threatening you, but by limiting you. A limited span makes choices meaningful because you cannot do everything. If you had infinite time, you could delay anything without consequence. You could try every path eventually. You could fix every mistake later. You could postpone every risk. But because your time is finite, choices become real. Choosing one path means not choosing another. Time forces you to prioritize even if you resist. This does not require fear. It requires clarity. Fear is one response to death, and it is understandable. The unknown is unsettling. The idea of non-existence can feel impossible to imagine. The loss of everything familiar can feel like a threat to the deepest instinct to survive. But existential thinking is less interested in fear as emotion and more interested in death as structure. Death is the boundary that makes life a lived project rather than an infinite possibility. Clarity about death can change how you live. It can produce dread, yes. Dread is not exactly fear. Fear usually has an object you can point to, a barking dog, a dangerous road, a visible threat. Dread is more diffuse. It is the feeling of standing in front of the unknown and realizing you cannot fully understand it. Dread can arise when you realize your life is moving whether you feel ready or not. It can arise when you realize no achievement cancels mortality. It can arise when you realize even your identity is temporary, but awareness of death can also produce focus. Focus comes from recognizing that you do not have unlimited time to be distracted. It comes from realizing that many of the things you worry about will not matter at the edge of life. It comes from seeing that approval is fragile, trends are temporary, and status is a thin foundation for meaning. When you remember death, you may begin to care less about performance and more about presence. This shift can be quiet but radical. Performance is living as if you are constantly being judged. It is shaping your life around how it looks. It is chasing a version of yourself that earns approval. Presence is different. Presence is living inside your experience rather than outside it. It is showing up to your life as it is. Presence does not mean ignoring goals. It means holding goals within a deeper awareness that life is not only a project to optimize. Life is also a series of moments that will not return. Authenticity grows when death becomes real. Authenticity does not mean being dramatic or confessing everything. It means aligning your actions with your values, even when nobody applauds. It means choosing what feels true over what looks impressive. It means refusing to waste your life in roles that suffocate you when you know the time is not endless. Many people live for approval because approval feels like safety. It feels like belonging. It feels like protection from rejection. But approval is unstable. It depends on other minds, on changing standards, on social mood. When death enters the frame, approval can begin to look smaller. Not meaningless, but smaller. You may still want to be respected and loved, but you may stop letting imagined judgment control your choices. Death can also shift how you relate to small moments. When you remember finitude, the ordinary can become precious without becoming sentimental. A meal becomes more than fuel. A conversation becomes more than passing time. A quiet walk becomes more than exercise. You notice details you usually rush past. You notice the sound of a familiar voice. You notice the warmth of water on your hands. You notice the softness of a bed. You notice the simple fact that you are here, breathing, aware. This is not about forcing gratitude. It is about seeing reality clearly. Finitude makes the present feel real. There is another implication that is harder to face. Death exposes how often people postpone living. They postpone rest until they finish everything, but everything never finishes. They postpone joy until they achieve security, but security keeps moving. They postpone honesty until the timing is perfect, but perfect timing rarely appears. They postpone love until they feel worthy, but worthiness is not a feeling that arrives fully formed. It is something you practice. When you remember death, postponement becomes visible. You see where you are waiting for permission. You see where you are waiting to feel ready. You see where you are living as if you have infinite retries. This is not meant to create panic. It is meant to create clarity. Clarity can be gentle. You do not need to sprint through life once you remember death. You do not need to turn every day into a dramatic statement. You simply need to live with a little more honesty, a little less avoidance, a little less self-deception, a little more alignment. Pause. Do not picture dramatic endings. Do not imagine hospitals or funerals or worst-case scenarios. That kind of imagery often triggers panic and turns death into spectacle. Instead, acknowledge finitude in a simple way. My time is limited. That is all. Let that truth land without argument. Then let your shoulders drop. Let your jaw soften. Let your breath slow. You are here now. This moment is here now. The awareness of death does not remove you from life. It returns you to life. In existential thought, this is the point. Death is not meant to paralyze you. It is meant to wake you. It is meant to strip away false urgency and reveal real urgency. Real urgency is not frantic. Real urgency is clear. It asks, what matters and what am I doing with my time? And once death gives life this urgency, another question appears, naturally and quietly. How do you live well with others? Not just how to survive, not just how to cope, how to act ethically without absolute rules handed down from a guaranteed source, how to choose values and commitments in a world that does not provide perfect answers. That brings us to the next segment, existential ethics. The idea that you build a moral life through responsibility, honesty, and chosen values, not through certainty. If no universal script guarantees the right life, how do you choose what is good? This question becomes sharper when you stop relying on easy answers. When you stop assuming that tradition will always guide you correctly. When you stop assuming that rebellion automatically makes you free. When you admit that the world is complex and people disagree not only about politics and taste, but about what a human life should be. Many people want ethics to function like a map that is already complete. They want clear rules that apply in every case. They want a system that tells them what to do so they can avoid guilt and uncertainty. But existential philosophy begins from a different place. It begins from the idea that you are responsible for your life, even when rules fail, even when the situation does not match the textbook, even when two values conflict and you cannot satisfy both. Existential ethics starts with responsibility. Responsibility here is not a moral scolding. It is a recognition. You act, and your actions shape the world. You choose, and your choices create consequences. You cannot avoid shaping your life. Even inaction shapes your life. Even silence shapes your life. So the first ethical fact is that you are already involved. This approach changes what ethics means. Ethics becomes less about obeying a fixed code and more about becoming a certain kind of person through how you live. You choose values through action, not only beliefs. A person can claim to value honesty while lying constantly. A person can claim to value compassion while treating people harshly. Existential ethics says values are not only ideas in your head. Values are patterns in your behavior. Values are what you protect when it costs you something. This is why existential ethics treats ethics as lived commitment. Commitment is different from opinion. An opinion can change with mood. A commitment anchors you. It shapes how you respond under pressure. It shapes what you do when nobody is watching. A commitment becomes part of your identity, not as a label, but as a practiced reality. You do not fully discover your values in isolation. You test them in life. You meet situations that challenge what you claim to believe. You face conflict. You face temptation. You face fatigue. You face fear. Then you learn what your values really are. Sometimes you learn that you have been lying to yourself. Sometimes you learn that your values were inherited, not chosen. Sometimes you learn that your values are sincere but immature and they need refinement. Existential ethics includes the willingness to revise. This is important because people often treat values as permanent identities. They cling to them because changing feels like betrayal, but values can harm. A value like loyalty can become destructive if it traps you in abusive relationships. A value like honesty can become cruel if it is used as a weapon. A value like independence can become isolating if it refuses all support. So existential ethics asks for a kind of moral humility. You commit, you act, you observe the consequences, and if your actions harm, you revise. Not because you have no principles, but because you take reality seriously. This is what makes existential ethics both demanding and deeply human. It removes hiding places. You cannot outsource your life to tradition alone. Tradition can be wise. It can also be outdated, biased, or misused. If you follow tradition blindly, you also cannot outsource your life to rebellion alone. Rebellion can be necessary. It can break oppressive patterns, but rebellion can also become another kind of hiding place. It can become a performance of freedom that avoids deeper responsibility. Some people reject rules not to become ethical, but to avoid accountability. They treat opposition as proof of authenticity. But opposing something does not automatically create a good life. It only creates distance from one set of norms. You still must choose what to stand for. So existential ethics places you in the middle again. You must decide, then live with the consequences, then decide again with deeper honesty. This can feel heavy because it means you cannot escape yourself. You cannot say, I was just following orders and feel fully relieved. You cannot say, I was just being myself and feel fully absolved. You cannot say, everyone does it and feel fully clean. You must ask, what am I doing and what does it create? There is a quiet strength in this approach. It treats you as an adult, even when you are uncertain. It respects your ability to reflect. It respects your capacity to learn. It respects the fact that ethics is not a set of abstract claims, but a daily practice built out of repeated choices. Think about promises. A promise is an ethical act in miniature. When you promise, you create a future obligation. You bind yourself. Nobody can force you to keep the promise. You can always break it. The value appears in what you do when breaking it would be easier, when nobody watches, when the cost is high. This is why existential ethics focuses on integrity, not image. Integrity is what you do when the performance ends. This also connects to the earlier segments on freedom and bad faith. Freedom means your choices matter. Bad faith means you may try to hide from that fact. Existential ethics asks you not to hide. It asks you to choose your values and live them, even when it is uncomfortable. But how do you choose values when the world offers many options? Existential ethics does not give you a single list. It gives you a method. The method is to choose values that can be lived without self-deception, values that respect other people as real centers of experience, values that you can affirm even under pressure, and values that you are willing to examine when they cause harm. A value becomes credible when it survives contact with life. Some people choose values that look good but collapse under difficulty. Some people choose values that protect the ego but destroy relationships. Some people choose values that feel noble but ignore reality. Existential ethics encourages a different kind of seriousness. It asks you to keep your values close to the ground, close to the human. This does not mean ethics becomes subjective in a careless way. It means ethics becomes personal in a responsible way. You cannot hide behind the idea that morality is relative to avoid the work of choosing. You also cannot hide behind the idea that morality is absolute to avoid examining how your actions affect real people. Now take a moment to reflect on one value you respect. Choose a value that feels real to you, not a value you think you should mention. It might be honesty, kindness, courage, fairness, loyalty, humility, curiosity, patience, responsibility, or something else. Hold it quietly in your mind. Then ask, how do I show it in small actions? Not in dramatic gestures, not in public performances. In small actions that happen daily. The tone you use with someone tired, the way you speak when you are irritated, the way you listen when you want to interrupt, the way you treat someone who cannot benefit you, the way you treat yourself when you fail, the way you handle power, even small power, the way you respond when nobody would blame you for taking the easy path. Small actions reveal values because they happen often. They shape character. They become your life. Breathe slowly as you consider this. Let the question be gentle, not accusing. If you notice a mismatch between your value and your behavior, do not attack yourself. Notice it. Mismatch is information. It shows where you can grow. It shows where you might be tired or afraid. It shows where you might need support. Existential ethics does not demand perfection. It demands honesty and responsibility. It asks you to keep returning to the work, to decide, to act, to observe, to revise, to become someone you can respect, not because you never fail, but because you take your life seriously. And then, inevitably, ethics collides with suffering. You can choose values, yet pain still arrives. Loss still arrives. Illness still arrives. Injustice still arrives. Sometimes your best ethical efforts do not protect you from grief. Sometimes kindness does not get rewarded. Sometimes doing the right thing costs you. This is where the next segment begins. Now we face the problem of suffering and what it does to meaning. We ask what it means to live ethically in a world where pain is not always fair and where the universe does not guarantee that goodness will be rewarded. Some pain makes sense. You touch something hot and pain warns you. You pull your hand back. You learn pain protects you. It has a clear purpose in the body. Some emotional pain also makes sense. You lose someone and grief rises because love was real. You fail at something you care about, and disappointment rises because the goal mattered. You feel guilt, and it signals that you crossed a boundary you respect. In these cases, pain connects to meaning. It points to something valuable, but other pain feels pointless. It shocks you with its randomness. A child suffers. A kind person gets ill. A careful plan collapses because of one careless moment. A storm destroys what people built. An accident changes a life in seconds. Betrayal arrives without warning. In these moments, pain does not feel like a teacher. It feels like a rupture. It feels like something that should not happen, and yet it happens. This is where the problem becomes philosophical. How does suffering fit into a meaningful world? The question has many forms. If the world is good, why is there so much harm? If there is a just order, why do the innocent suffer? If life has purpose, why does it include such sharp cruelty? If existence is not guided by a moral plan, then what does suffering mean at all? Some traditions argue that suffering builds character. They suggest that pain is necessary for growth, like heat that tempers metal. They say hardship makes you wiser, more compassionate, more resilient. There is some truth here. Many people do grow through pain. Many people become deeper and more honest because they were forced to face reality. Pain can strip away illusions. It can reveal what matters. But others reject this idea as too neat. They see it as a way to justify cruelty. They see it as a story that comforts observers while ignoring the reality of the person suffering. Not all suffering builds character. Some suffering breaks people. Some suffering traumatizes. Some suffering creates bitterness, numbness, or despair. Some suffering is simply damage. So the idea that suffering always has a positive purpose can sound like a lie told to make the world feel fair when it is not. Existential thought often refuses to justify suffering. This refusal is not cynicism. It is a kind of moral honesty. It says, do not rush to explain pain away. Do not turn someone's grief into a lesson for your comfort. Do not pretend the universe is kind when it is indifferent. Do not insist that everything happens for a reason if you cannot name the reason without insulting the reality of loss. Instead, existential thought shifts the focus. It focuses on response. Not because response cancels suffering, but because response is where your freedom still lives. Suffering may arrive uninvited. But how you face pain, how you support others, how you refuse to become cruel, these are choices. They matter because they shape what suffering produces in you and in the world around you. This is a hard idea, and it can sound unfair at first. People ask, why should I be responsible for what I did not choose? Why should I have to turn pain into something meaningful? That is a real question. Existential thought does not answer it with comforting certainty. It answers it with a grounded truth. You may not be responsible for the fact of suffering, but you are responsible for what you do with the life that remains. There is a difference between making suffering meaningful and pretending suffering is good. Existential thought does not ask you to celebrate pain. It asks you to avoid letting pain become an excuse for cruelty, avoidance, or self-destruction. It asks you to turn suffering into something that does not spread. This is where ethics returns, not as a rule book, but as a stance. When you suffer, you may feel tempted to harden. Hardening can feel protective. It can also isolate you. It can make you treat other people as threats. It can reduce your empathy. It can turn you into someone you do not want to become. When you suffer, you may also feel tempted to numb. Numbing can bring short-term relief. It can also disconnect you from the very parts of life that give meaning. It can flatten joy along with pain. When you suffer, you may feel tempted to seek a neat explanation because a neat explanation feels like control. But neat explanations often distort reality. They can blame the victim. They can deny randomness. They can treat the world as fair when it is not. Existential thought invites a different move. It invites you to face suffering without denial and without romance. It invites you to say, "This hurts. This is real. I do not need to pretend it is good. I do not need to pretend it is fair. But I will decide what kind of person I will be while I carry it." This is where meaning becomes possible even without a guarantee. If suffering has no guaranteed meaning, you can still create meaning through care, solidarity, and honesty. You can create meaning by refusing to let pain turn you into someone cruel. You can create meaning by being present with others in their suffering. You can create meaning by telling the truth about what happened, even when truth is uncomfortable. You can create meaning by building small islands of kindness in a world that does not promise kindness. This does not erase pain. It changes what pain produces in you. Pain will still hurt. Loss will still sting. Grief will still come in waves. But the presence of meaning changes the direction of the energy. Instead of pain becoming poison, it becomes a condition you learn to carry with dignity. Instead of pain isolating you completely, it can open you to compassion because you recognize suffering in others more quickly. Instead of pain making you numb, it can make you more honest because you stop pretending life is simple. This is one of the quiet truths of human life. Many of the most compassionate people did not become compassionate because life was easy. They became compassionate because they learned how much pain exists and decided not to add more. Solidarity matters here. Solidarity is different from sympathy. Sympathy can remain distant. Solidarity says, "I will stand with you. I may not be able to solve your pain, but I will not treat you as alone." This is one way meaning appears in a world that does not guarantee meaning. It appears between people. It appears in the choice to show up, in the choice to listen, in the choice to help without needing a reward. Honesty matters too. Honesty does not mean brutal realism that destroys hope. It means naming what is true. It means admitting that sometimes life is unfair. It means admitting that you cannot always explain why harm happens. It means admitting that you can still choose how you live. At night, when you are trying to sleep, suffering often becomes louder. The mind replays losses. The body carries old tension. Memories rise. This is why the tone matters. You do not need to force insight from pain tonight. You do not need to turn suffering into a lesson on command. Pause. If you carry a heavy memory, you do not need to analyze it tonight. Just let yourself acknowledge it gently, then let it rest. You can say quietly, yes, that happened. Yes, it hurt. Yes, it still echoes. Then you can return to your breath. In, out, simple, continuous. You do not need to solve the past to rest in the present. And after suffering, many people look up at the night sky and feel small. That feeling can scare you or it can calm you. Sometimes it does both. Smallness can feel like insignificance. It can also feel like relief. If the universe is vast, maybe your shame does not need to be so loud. If the universe is vast, maybe your mistakes do not need to define you forever. If the universe is vast, maybe your suffering is not a personal punishment. It is part of a reality that is larger than any one story. The final segment turns toward cosmic perspective, then returns to quiet acceptance. It steps back from the personal and looks at the wide frame, not to erase your life, but to place it in context and to let the mind soften into rest. Think of the universe as vast, silent, and old. Not the universe as a picture on a screen, not as a concept you learned in school, but as a real immensity, a space that stretches beyond any horizon you have ever seen, a space filled with stars you will never visit and distances your mind cannot hold without turning them into numbers. Think of time not in days or years, but in ages. Think of galaxies forming and fading long before any human language existed. Think of light traveling for millions of years and arriving somewhere with no audience waiting. Then think of your single life, brief, ordinary in many ways, still aware, a consciousness looking out from inside a body on a small planet, a mind that can ask questions the universe does not answer, a mind that can feel wonder, fear, love, and sorrow, then name those feelings. The contrast between these two images can feel cold, or it can feel freeing. This is the cosmic perspective. Cosmic perspective asks what your life means in a large universe. It does not ask in order to insult you. It asks in order to reframe. When you step back far enough, many things that feel urgent begin to look smaller. The roles you perform, the arguments you replay, the mistakes you cannot stop thinking about, the anxieties that tighten your chest, all of them exist, but they no longer fill the entire frame. Some people fear insignificance when they adopt this perspective. They feel like a speck. They think, if I am so small, then nothing I do matters. If the universe is indifferent, then my hopes are meaningless. If time is so vast, then my efforts disappear. This fear makes sense if you assume meaning must be cosmic to be real. If you assume meaning must be validated by the universe itself. If you assume your life must be important on a universal scale to be worth living. Under those assumptions, smallness feels like humiliation, but others find relief in the same perspective. They look at the vastness and feel their shoulders drop. They think, if the universe does not fixate on my mistakes, maybe I can soften around them too. If the universe is not judging me, maybe I can stop staging my life as if a final jury is watching. If everything is temporary, maybe my shame does not deserve to be permanent. If I am small, maybe I can stop treating every misstep like a catastrophe. Cosmic perspective can reduce the harshness of self-obsession. Not self-care, but self-obsession. The endless internal loop where you analyze yourself, criticize yourself, rehearse conversations, replay embarrassments, worry about how you are seen. This loop makes your life feel crowded and heavy. Cosmic perspective opens space. It reminds you that you do not need to be the center of everything, not even the center of your own anxious imagination. Existential philosophy does not require grand importance. It does not demand that your life be significant to the cosmos. It allows local meaning in one room, between two people, in one honest decision, meaning in the way you show up to a conversation, meaning in the way you refuse to spread harm, meaning in the way you care for someone when nobody will praise you for it, meaning in the way you keep a promise, meaning in the way you choose truth over performance. Local meaning does not need cosmic permission. It needs sincerity. It needs responsibility. It needs presence. This is a quiet but powerful idea. Many people suffer because they believe their life must become extraordinary to be worthwhile. They chase significance as if it were oxygen. They fear being average. They fear being forgotten. They fear living a small life. But what is a small life? A life can look small from the outside and still be full on the inside. A life can include kindness, depth, honesty, and love without ever becoming famous or widely recognized. Cosmic perspective helps you see this. It shows you that importance is not the same as meaning. Importance is often social. It depends on attention, influence, and scale. Meaning is often intimate. It lives in your lived experience and in the lives you touch directly. A person can be important and empty. A person can be unnoticed and deeply meaningful. A vast universe can dissolve ego and reduce urgency. This does not mean you stop caring. It means you stop treating everything as a crisis. Ego wants to be central. Ego wants to be special. Ego wants to be right. Ego wants to be safe. Ego wants to control. When you step back into cosmic perspective, ego becomes less convincing. You still have a self, but it feels less like a tyrant and more like a tool. The inner drama quiets. The need to win every argument softens. The need to prove yourself relaxes. This reduced urgency can be, at the same time, cosmic perspective can sharpen gratitude. Not forced gratitude, not the kind that denies pain, but a quieter gratitude that comes from rarity. Consciousness appears rare enough, at least from what we can observe, that each moment of awareness matters to the one living it. The universe may be full of matter and energy, but matter that knows it exists is another category entirely. You are a piece of the universe that can reflect on the universe. That is strange. That is delicate. That is worth noticing. Gratitude here does not mean you must be happy about everything. It means you can recognize the simple fact of being awake, being aware, being able to feel and think as something that did not have to happen. It is a quiet recognition, not a celebration. Take a moment to reflect on one simple fact. You exist, you notice, that is already something. You may have problems, you may have regrets, you may have grief, you may feel tired. None of that is denied. But beneath all of it, there is the basic fact of awareness. The ability to notice a sound. The ability to feel your breath. The ability to understand words. The ability to imagine. The ability to remember. The ability to care. These capacities are not small. Now pause. Breathe in, breathe out. Let the questions fade into the background. Not because they are unimportant, but because you do not need to solve existence to rest inside it. You can let the mind loosen its grip. You can let the urge to conclude relax. You can allow yourself to be a living being in a vast universe without demanding a final explanation tonight. Quiet acceptance is not resignation. It is a soft agreement with reality. It is the decision to stop fighting what cannot be changed in this moment. It is the willingness to let the universe be large and silent without treating that silence as an insult. It is the willingness to let your life be finite without turning finitude into panic. It is the willingness to let meaning be local, lived, and chosen. As you settle into this, notice how sleep begins to feel more natural. Sleep is a small surrender. You let go of control. You let go of certainty. You let the conscious mind rest. In a way, sleep is the body practicing trust night after night. This is the closing segment. If you want a continuous experience, you can loop softly back to the first question, the midnight question, and let the cycle begin again in a calmer tone. You can let the ideas repeat like gentle waves, not as problems to solve, but as rhythms to rest with. Or you can let the final silence arrive. You can let the words end. You can let the room be quiet again. You can let your breathing guide you down into sleep. You do not need to finish anything. You do not need to complete a thought. You only need to allow rest to take over, slowly, naturally, one breath at a time. You zoom out to the scale of stars. You imagine the universe as vast, silent, and old. Then quietly you return, not to a galaxy, not to a grand revelation. You return to a single room. The same ceiling, the same wall, the same corners holding their familiar shapes, the same quiet objects that have been waiting while your mind wandered outward. A chair, a cup, a phone on a table, a blanket folded or crumpled, a door that leads to another room you know by heart. Nothing in the room has changed, and yet the return can feel strange because your attention has changed. The ordinary looks slightly different when you come back from the cosmic frame. It looks smaller but also more intimate, more real. This is the ordinary room after the cosmos. It is where most of your life actually happens. It is easy to think that meaning should arrive in big ways. A clear purpose, a perfect answer, a dramatic turning point, a moment when the universe feels like it speaks directly to you. But even if you had those moments, you would still wake up in a room. You would still need to drink water. You would still need to choose what to say to another person. You would still need to decide what to do with an afternoon. Meaning, if it exists for you, must live here, inside the everyday texture of life. Existential philosophy has a quiet respect for the ordinary, not because the ordinary is always pleasant, but because it is honest. The ordinary is the place where you cannot hide behind abstract ideas. You cannot live inside a theory. You live inside minutes, inside habits, inside the way you respond when you are tired, inside the way you treat people when nobody is watching, inside the way you carry your body through the day. The room is not just a setting. It is a stage where your values become actions. There is a simple shift that begins here. You stop searching for meaning only as a final explanation. You start noticing meaning as lived orientation. You see that your life already has a structure, even before you name it. You already care about some things more than others. You already move towards some objects and away from others. You already protect some parts of yourself. You already avoid certain feelings. Your world is not a neutral field. It is arranged around your concerns. Look at a simple object in your imagination, something ordinary in your room, a cup, for example. In a purely scientific description, the cup is a material form with weight and texture. But that is not how you meet it. You meet it as something to drink from. You meet it as a small solution to thirst. You meet it as a part of routine, maybe tied to morning coffee or a late-night sip of water. It carries function. It carries memory. It carries a quiet meaning that comes from its place in your life. The same is true for a door. A door is not only a rectangle of wood or metal, it is an exit. It is privacy. It is separation. It is also possibility. You can leave. You can enter. You can close it to create safety. You can open it to invite someone in. The door is an object, but it also holds a human world of significance. A bed is the clearest example. A bed is fabric and frame, but it is also rest, vulnerability, and the place where you return to yourself each night. For some people, it is safety. For others, it is where anxiety gets loud. For others, it is where grief visits. The bed is not neutral. It is charged with lived meaning. This is what the ordinary room reveals. You do not encounter the world as raw data. This has an unsettling implication and a comforting one. The unsettling implication is that you can live for years without truly seeing your life. You can move through rooms and routines like a sleepwalker. You can do things because they are expected. You can avoid questions because they are inconvenient. You can fill time without feeling it. You can let days blur into each other until time feels like it disappeared. The comforting implication is that meaning does not require a grand cosmic assignment. Meaning can be local. It can be built where you are. It can be practiced in the small spaces you inhabit. It can exist in one room, between two people, in one honest decision. After the cosmos, the ordinary room can feel like a grounding force. Cosmic perspective can dissolve ego, but it can also create a cold feeling of distance. The room brings you back to contact. The floor under you, the air on your skin, the familiar objects that mark the reality of your life. There is something calming about this contact because it reminds you that you do not live in infinity. You live here, in a finite body, in a finite place, in a finite day. This return is not a downgrade, it is a correction. Many people chase meaning in a way that pulls them away from their own lives. They imagine meaning as something far away, something they will reach later, once they become better, once they become more successful, once they become more certain. But meaning is often less like a destination and more like a way of being present. It is the quality of attention you bring to what you do. It is the honesty of your actions. It is the care you put into your relationships. It is the alignment between what you say matters and what you actually give your time to. In the ordinary room, you can see this alignment more clearly. You can notice the things that absorb your attention. You can notice the habits that drain you. You can notice the objects that symbolize stress, like a laptop that never closes, or a phone that keeps pulling you into endless noise. You can notice the objects that symbolize comfort, like a blanket, a book, a small light. The room becomes a map of your life, not because it contains all your meaning, but because it reflects your patterns. This is also where the idea of intentional living becomes simple. Intentional does not mean intense. It does not mean constantly optimizing. It does not mean squeezing productivity out of every hour. It means living with awareness. It means noticing when you are drifting and gently returning. It means choosing your next action with a little more honesty. It means remembering that your life is made of small moments, not only major milestones. There is a risk here. The ordinary can become invisible again. The mind will slip back into automatic mode. That is not failure. That is the human default. The key is not to stay awake forever. The key is to wake up again and again. So pause for a moment. Picture one ordinary object in your room. Choose something simple. A key, a cup, a charger cable, a pillow, a notebook. Hold it in your mind with quiet clarity. Ask one question. What does this object stand for in my life? Not as poetry, as function and feeling. Does it stand for routine? Does it stand for pressure? Does it stand for comfort? Does it stand for avoidance? Does it stand for care? Notice what comes up without forcing it. You might be surprised by how much meaning sits in plain things. Now let the object fade from your mind and return to your breath. In, out. The room holds you. The night holds you. You do not need to chase the universe right now. You have already looked. You have already returned. When you return to the ordinary, you may notice something else. Your mind keeps trying to control the story. It wants closure. It wants certainty. It wants to finish the thought. But night does not require closure. Sleep requires letting go. That is the bridge into what comes next. Surrender, not as giving up, but as releasing the demand to solve everything right now. A quiet permission to rest inside the ordinary room, inside a life that remains open, inside questions that can wait until morning. Every night you do something radical without applause. You let go of control. You stop monitoring the world. You stop tracking every detail. You stop defending your identity for a while. You allow consciousness to fade. Even if you struggle with sleep, even if your mind resists, the movement is still the same. You try to release the day. You try to stop holding everything. You try to stop gripping the future with your thoughts, as if thinking hard enough could guarantee safety. Sleep is not only rest, it is practice. It is a daily exercise in existential trust. You cannot fully guarantee tomorrow. You cannot prove that everything will be okay. You cannot know what messages will arrive, what changes will happen, what losses will appear, what surprises will come. You cannot fully solve your life tonight. And yet you still lie down. You still close your eyes. You still let your body lean into gravity. You still allow the mind to loosen. This is not weakness. It is the human condition. If you refused to sleep until you had certainty, you would never sleep. Certainty is not something life offers on demand. Life offers partial knowledge, shifting conditions, and the need to act anyway. Sleep asks you to accept this. It asks you to rest without a final answer. Existential philosophy often returns to one central skill: living with uncertainty without collapsing. The same skill helps you sleep. You do not need final conclusions to rest. You need a safe enough moment and a willingness to stop gripping. Many people confuse surrender with failure. They hear the word surrender and think it means giving up on life, accepting defeat, letting others win. But surrender in this context means something else. It means pausing the demand to manage everything right now. It means accepting that some questions remain open. It means allowing your nervous system to step out of the alert state for a while. It means letting the body do what it knows how to do. The body knows how to sleep. The mind often interrupts. The mind interrupts because it believes it is protecting you. It replays conversations to prevent future embarrassment. It rehearses worst-case scenarios to prevent surprise. It reviews mistakes to prevent repetition. It scrolls through memories and worries as if worry were a form of preparation. Sometimes the mind is trying to solve real problems. Sometimes it is simply stuck in habit. Either way, the effect is the same. It keeps you awake by refusing to release control. So the practice of surrender begins gently, with a different relationship to thought. A thought appears. You notice it. You do not fight it. You do not argue with it. You do not chase it down every path. You let it pass like a car moving down a quiet road. The thought can exist without becoming your project. This is harder than it sounds because the mind is persuasive. It says, this is important. This cannot wait. If you do not solve this now, you will suffer later. It can feel irresponsible to let the thought go. But surrender is not denial. It is timing. You can face hard truths in daylight, with energy, with support. You can make decisions when you are rested. You can repair relationships when you are calm. You can plan when your mind is clear. Night is not a courtroom. Night is not an office. Night is a place where you return to the body. Surrender becomes a sequence of small permissions. Permission to not finish the thought. Permission to not solve the past tonight. Permission to not predict the future tonight. Permission to be a finite person in a finite night. These permissions are not slogans. They are actions of release. Each time you let a thought go, you practice trust. You practice the leap, but in a quieter form. You act without full certainty by allowing sleep to come without full certainty. This connects to everything you have explored so far. Freedom feels heavy when you demand perfect certainty. Bad faith grows when you pretend you have no choice or when you pretend you have total control. The absurd hurts when you demand meaning from a silent world. Eternal recurrence challenges you to affirm your life rather than endlessly wishing for an alternate version. The paradox of free will invites humility about what shapes you and what you can shape. Time reminds you that the present slips away. Death reminds you that life is finite. Surrender gathers these ideas into one bodily act. It says, I can live without guarantees. I can rest without guarantees too. There is a quiet courage in this. You are not only surrendering the day, you are surrendering the fantasy of total control. You are surrendering the demand that life be completely understandable before you relax. You are surrendering the belief that you must hold everything at once to be safe. Safety does not come from holding everything. Safety often comes from letting go. If you are lying in bed right now, notice how the body already understands surrender. The bed supports your weight whether you analyze it or not. Gravity holds you without asking for permission. The breath continues without needing instructions. Your heart keeps beating without your control. Even when your mind insists on control, your body is quietly demonstrating a different truth. Life is happening through you, not only because of you. Let that truth become calming rather than frightening. You do not have to manage the breath perfectly. You do not have to force relaxation. You can simply allow. Allow the exhale to lengthen a little. Allow the shoulders to drop a little. Allow the tongue to rest. Allow the muscles around the eyes to soften. These are small releases, but they signal to the nervous system that the danger scan can pause. Surrender also changes your relationship with meaning. Meaning is not only produced by thinking. Meaning is often produced by presence, by repair, by care, by honest action. Those things are possible tomorrow. Tonight, rest is the most honest action you can take. Rest is not laziness. Rest is maintenance. Rest is respect for your limits. Rest is a way of saying my body matters, my mind matters, my life is not a machine. There is also a subtle lesson inside sleep. Sleep teaches you that you can disappear for a while and return. You can let the self loosen and still come back. The world continues without your constant supervision. This can be unsettling if you crave control, but it can also be deeply freeing. You do not have to be on duty every moment. Sometimes people fear surrender because they fear what arises in silence. When the noise stops, memories appear, regrets appear, emotions appear. The mind brings unfinished business to the surface. If that happens, be gentle with yourself. You do not need to push those things away with force. Force wakes you up. Instead, acknowledge them softly. Yes, that happened. Yes, I feel that. Yes, it matters. Then return to breath. Return to the feeling of the bed. Return to the fact that you are here now, and this moment is enough. Surrender is not a dramatic gesture. It is a quiet repetition. You will let go. Then you will grip again. Then you will let go again. This is normal. Each time you notice you are gripping, you have already created a small opening. You can take that opening and soften again. That is the practice. Now pause. Let your shoulders drop. Unclench your jaw. Let your brow smooth. Feel the surface beneath you, steady and patient. Notice the breath moving on its own. In, out. If a thought appears, let it pass without argument. You do not need to win against your mind. You only need to stop following every thought to its conclusion. This is the end. You can loop back to the first segment if you want the questions to continue softly in the background, like waves that return and recede. You can let the midnight question reappear, not as a problem, but as a gentle curiosity that floats in and out of awareness. Or you can let the question stop. You can let the silence return. You can let the room be quiet again. You can let your breath become the only rhythm you track. You can allow sleep to take over slowly, naturally, one breath at a time. Existential philosophy begins with a simple shock. You are here. The world is here. You did not choose to arrive, yet you must live from inside your life. When you face that fact without distraction, you start to see what shapes you, what you can choose, and what you cannot control. Across these ideas, one theme stays steady. Meaning is not guaranteed by the universe. It is built through attention, honesty, and responsibility. Freedom can feel heavy, so the mind hides in roles, excuses, or certainty. But when you stop hiding, you gain something calmer than certainty. You gain clarity. You learn to choose your values in small actions, to face suffering without turning it into cruelty, and to accept impermanence without panic. The cosmic perspective does not erase you. It puts you in proportion. In a vast universe, you do not need grand importance to live a meaningful life. Local meaning is enough. Meaning in one room, between two people, in one honest decision. And at night, you do not need to solve existence to rest inside it. You can let the questions soften, let control loosen, and let sleep become a quiet practice of trust.